For some background, there's this app called Life 360 where you can add friends and family on. Essentially, you can all see each other's current and past locations. You can also set up alerts to be notified when someone comes home or leaves, arrives at work, etc. It's really good. I recommend it to everyone. You can never be too safe nowadays. 2 months ago, I was at home waiting for my boyfriend to get home. I got an alert around 6 p.m. letting me know that he has left work. It usually took him 45 minutes to get home. I got up from the sofa and headed upstairs to run myself a bath. My bath was ready in about 10 minutes. I was doing other bits of things while I was waiting for it to cool when I heard a thud downstairs, and through the closed bathroom door I assumed it was the front door. I shouted out something along the lines of, "I'm taking a bath." I heard him walking along our very creaky floorboards and assumed that he was in the kitchen grabbing some dinner. About 5 minutes later, when I picked up my phone to put on some music and realized I never got an alert on my phone from Life 360 saying that my boyfriend had arrived home. I went into the app to make sure I didn't mess up the settings by accident, and I kid you not, my blood ran cold when I saw that my boyfriend had stopped at a petrol station and was still about a half hour away. I could still hear the floorboards creaking downstairs, very lightly, as if someone was trying to tiptoe, but were unable to. I had no idea what to do. I called my boyfriend, he didn't answer, and when I didn't hear his phone ring from downstairs, I freaked out even more. I have horrible anxiety and could feel an attack coming on. I left the bathroom and walked into the bedroom as quietly as possible. I shoved my desk chair under the knob as it didn't have a lock. I don't know why, but I didn't think to call the police then. I was so focused on getting out that all my other thoughts and senses just disappeared. I say this lightly now, but this was not the case at the moment. I proceeded to basically Mission Impossible it out of my bedroom. We had a shed underneath the window, large enough for me to safely get on top of it and then jump off from there into the garden. The only issue was that I had to make my way down the garden alley, where I would have to walk past our large window and door. He would be able to see me very clearly. I was so scared, I kept taking peeks into the window, and I couldn't see anyone. I felt more confident to run past and took one last peek. And there he was, looking right at me, not even a foot away from the window. I can't even begin to explain the sheer fear and horror I felt looking him right in the eyes. He had such a cold expression, totally emotionless. I ran, didn't look back. I was so fucking terrified. I remember nearly tripping in my slippers and having to shake them off so I could run faster. There was a long road between us and our neighbors, where I was running to. I did make it. Their lights were on and I started pounding on their window. I was let in and they called the police for me, as I was inconsolable at that point. I kept telling them to please call my boyfriend, as he was driving home too. When the police arrived, they found that no one was there. We didn't have cameras, and neither did my neighbors, so we have no way of telling when or how he entered and left. I later found out that he came through the window. The noise I heard, which I assumed was the door. The window had fell downward and shut loudly, I assume after the man came in. There were also scratches on the top of the chair that I put under my doorknob, signaling that he tried to push it open, but was unable to. There wasn't much of a case. I couldn't ID him. He was also wearing a face mask and beanie, and I don't even know what color hair he has. The only thing I saw was his eyes. He was white, tall, slim, and a man. I only looked at him for a mere second, if that. Nothing was stolen either. We have cameras and a security system now. Never making that mistake ever again. This happened this weekend. Our neighbors were having a late night outside dinner party. My wife had turned off all the lights in our house, and I assumed she had locked the doors, but she hadn't, as I was to find out. She had gone to bed. The house was dark, and I was more or less alone. I was in my office room, and from the living room I heard, "Want some chicken?" It was a small voice, a girl's voice. I heard, "You want some chicken?" 2 or 3 more times from the living room. I went into the pitch black living room and heard them again. I decided I was going to stand my ground, defend my home, and meekly ask, "Are you in my house? You want some chicken?" I can see the door is open now, and I'm shitting a brick. "Why are you in my house? You want some chicken? You can't be here. Please leave." The screen door closes, but not my front door. I close the door and lock it and tell my wife, who says, "That's probably just a neighbor's little girl." Now I'm pretty sure she's right, but that scared the fuck out of me. In my defense, they had never brought over food for us before, and it was 9:30 p.m. This happened a long time ago when I was 18. I'm 50 now, but still remember it clearly. I was living with a friend in an apartment. My bedroom was way in the back. Little background, my friend and I did a lot of hitchhiking back then. There's a reason I mention this. Back to the story. I was taking a nap one afternoon, and I opened my eyes to see someone in my doorway. It was the guy we hitched a ride with from a bit ago, who we stupidly had drop us off right in front of our apartment. He was just standing there looking at me, and I was the only one home. Some instinct told me not to act scared, so I sat up and greeted him like it was totally normal to see a strange man staring at me from my bedroom door. I quickly got up and got him into the living room of the front of the apartment, acting like it was a nice surprise seeing him, and talking casually the whole time. My pretense at being casual worked, thank God, because he left shortly after. I truly think if I would have acted frightened and lost my shit, it would have been the catalyst he needed to do whatever he might have been thinking of doing. Predators love fear. I don't want to think about what he might have done if I had gave in and got visibly frightened. I just know I was extremely relieved when he left without hurting me. He was planning something because he snuck in my pad and apparently was just watching me sleep when I woke up and saw him. Was he just going to keep watching? Somehow I doubt it. I thought twice about being dropped off at my place again. I should have stopped hitchhiking too, but we were young and stupid. Those stories are for another time. This is the first time I've ever written it down. Curious what anyone thinks if my reaction might have saved me, because I really believed it did. Like I said, predators love fear, and I did my best to hide it. It worked. God was definitely protecting me because I don't know if I would have thought that quickly otherwise. That was still a scary experience though. I was shaking inside when he finally left. This kind of mess up thing always happens in the worst situations. I get nervous, act stupidly, and the world blesses me with mercy. This time around I was at home, pretty unusual for me. The last days I had been sick and stayed home from school. That Friday I was fully recovered, but decided to skip class anyways because it was the end of the week and it just wasn't worth the trip. Little background. Both of my parents were out. My father had late shifts and my mother was taking care of an elder, so she had to sleep at her house. We have wooden slabs that close on the windows and doors for heavy weather, that are also closed at night to avoid people from looking inside through the curtains that were very transparent, especially at night when the only light source was inside the house. My parents used to open them when they were at home during the day to make the environment naturally illuminated, but I spent the day in my room like a goblin, so I never did. The only one I opened was the one that my parents left open for getting out of the house, and this is an important detail. I was starting to notice a gray car parked across the road on certain times of the day. They simply parked, stayed a while, and drove off. I figured that it must be some of the neighbors' visitors since they didn't have a place for more cars, so sometimes their friends would park at the bus stop. One day I was cutting myself some tomatoes for a sandwich when I heard a loud bang on the glass door. I quickly turned around to where the sounds were coming from and spotted a man who was throwing himself against the door with his whole body weight. I'll tell you, this door isn't made to hold any kind of trauma. It was a full pane of glass, as fragile as it may sound. It's been broken by mistake during parties, and I was totally sure looking at the shaky nails that it wouldn't have lasted after 2 bangs. My mind at this point dropped to caveman level. I decided to open the door with a fucking table knife in my hand. A rounded table knife. The man fell before my feet, and I collected myself with the most efficient expression I could give. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him as he quickly got up and backed off. He then proceeded to make up the messiest explanation I've ever heard. He said something like, "Oh, I didn't know you were home," and then asked me if my parents were home, because he has a service for sharpening knives. That is the thing here. People go around the street and stop at the houses for various services. He then looked quickly at my hand and responded himself that we didn't need anything sharpened and that he had made a mistake. I then saw a woman coming around the corner, about to come into the house before noticing me. The man turned around and shook his head with his eyes wide open. She backed off and then they ran out to a car, which unfortunately I didn't get the plates. I then closed the wooden slabs, shut the door, and proceeded eating my unfinished sandwich with my shaky hands. This just happened about a half hour ago, and I'm still reeling from it. It's 1:30 in the morning, and I just got home from hanging out with one of my cousins. I'm in the Midwest, so we've been getting slammed all night by runoff of the hurricane weather down south. So I was driving, coming up to my house in a downpour, and winds were almost knocking me over. I'm on my porch waiting for my brother to come unlock the door, when I look behind me and see a guy walking towards me. Now, we're no strangers to people going past our house. We're at the end of the first side road in a good-sized neighborhood, and to the left of us is a walking trail. Just before that, we have a fire station with a huge parking lot. Across the street from that was a party store, and some apartments. So it's not uncommon to see people going past the side of our house, beyond the fence, or down our road at all times of the night. But again, it had been storming bad all night. Who would go out in this? This dude was maybe 500 or 600 feet away from me, straddling the line between the fire station lot and my neighbor's yard. He's limping a little, and I could sort of make out his silhouette. He's bulky, with a hat on, those fuzzy lumberjack hats, like the one that Cousin Eddie wears on Christmas vacation. The longer I wait, the closer he gets. It felt like a good 5 minutes before my brother finally opens the door. I slide in and spend 20 seconds trying to fiddle the deadbolt in place. I sneak over to the far edge of the living room, to the window that looks outside, and he's heading towards my house. We have a dresser in our yard that my mom is fixing up, and this guy is right behind it, walking up our walkway. At this point, I start freaking out. I can see him a little better now with the porch light on. He had a jacket over maybe a sweatshirt and that furry hat, and for some reason a face mask. Just a regular disposable one. This dude is walking in a beeline straight for my porch. I'm on autopilot now. I rush into the kitchen and shut off the lights. With it on, you can see the shadow straight onto the living room window, and I wanted the element of surprise on this dude. With that, I headed back to the window and quietly looked outside again. The dude is gone. I glanced on my porch, into the yard, down the road. No sign of him anywhere. I didn't hear him coming off my porch, which you usually can. It's all the dead leaves on the side of the house, and I didn't hear any crunching there. So at the end of writing this, it's been about 45 minutes. Both ways into our house are locked and dead bolted. My windows are a good 7 to 8 feet above the ground, so it would take some effort getting through them, and I haven't heard anything. Best case scenario, this dude was just trying to stay dry for a second before walking back out. Hopefully I'm spooked for nothing, and it would be quiet for the rest of the night. But man, I still got goosebumps. Years ago, when me and my brother were kids, we lived with our parents in a suburb in a small town. Here we were surrounded by houses on one side and a large open mountain range on the other. One Halloween night, I'm guessing somewhere between 2004 and 2006, my mother had put us to bed and my dad was working away sailing ships at the time, so she was alone watching TV in the living room downstairs. She noticed something out of the corner of her eye and felt the sudden sensation of being watched. In the window next to her, she could see someone in a Halloween mask looking straight towards her. At first she freaked out, but then she brushed it off as someone being funny. After all, it was Halloween. But as some time went by and this person still hadn't moved, she decided enough was enough and she drew her blinds. Sometime later she decided to go to bed and went to double check if the doors were locked. Through a small one-way glass in the door, she saw the person still standing there, face up close to the same window, despite not being able to see anything through it. This freaked her out. She opened and closed the door with a loud bang. The window he stood in was roughly 10 meters away from our main entrance door, so she wasn't in any harm's way. Luckily, that seemed to scare him off, and he was never seen again. I'm super creeped out right now. I'm a 27-year-old female. Last night I was home, completely alone and sleeping in my bed. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by the sound of someone trying to push up my locked bedroom window. I couldn't see my window because it was past my footboard on the other side of my bedroom, and I was laying down. But I knew that unmistakable sound of the window being locked and the jiggling sound it makes, because I've locked myself out plenty of times and I've tried to get through that window before. I sat up to get a look, and I saw a dark silhouette of a person standing looking through my window. I laid back down for a second, really confused and tired. When it actually clicked what I had seen, I sat right back up. They were gone. I tried to get back to sleep, but was spooked for the rest of the night. In the morning, I thought I might have dreamt it, and I called everyone I knew that it could have been, and no one knew anything. No one was at my house. Nobody I knew was trying to get into my house in the middle of the night through my bedroom window, especially when I don't think the person even knocked on the front door before trying to open the window. I went outside to investigate to see if I was just crazy. I looked out the window and saw a handprint of whoever was trying to slide up the glass. Also, it had recently rained, so I could see the muddy shoe prints going to and from my window. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted, but I'm so glad that window was locked. I'm not entirely sure this qualifies as creepy, so much as it was straight up scary. I live in a rural area. It was late fall 2007. There's only a few houses within a mile of where I live. One night I was laying in bed asleep and I woke up to what I thought was a girl screaming for help. It was about 1 a.m. I sat up to listen to see if I was dreaming. Then I heard it again, much closer this time. "Help me! Somebody help!" Before I could even get out of bed, some girl was pounding on my door begging for me to let her in. Not even giving it a second thought, I was racing downstairs to see what was wrong. As soon as I got to the door, I could see her nose was bleeding and her mouth was cut. My first thought was that she was in a car accident. I found out differently almost immediately. I opened the door to let her in, and 2 steps behind her was her boyfriend. He was attacking her. She got to the door and I tried to close it behind her, but he stopped it from closing by putting his hand on it. Now I can only assume it was adrenaline, but when the door popped open and he took a step into my house, I put my hands on his chest and pushed him back to the door, at least 4 or 5 steps. With my other hand, I pointed at his face and told him, "If you take one more step in my house, it will be your last." His eyes got big and he was apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll leave." We called the cops and he was arrested. Turned out they were at the bar and he hit her, so she left him there. He walked all the way to her house, which was a 1/4 mile away from my house. I just happened to be the first house she came across. I lived in the middle of nowhere, in the country. Closest house was a few miles away. My parents never let me be home alone, but they had to go get groceries from a town 40 minutes away, and I begged not to go. I just wanted to stay home and play with my Barbies. They agreed. I was having the time of my life, and all of a sudden, I hear both dogs barking outside. They would only bark like that when a car would pull up. I am on the second floor of my home. The front door is on the first floor, right by the stairs to the basement. I look out my window and just stare because I have a sinking feeling in my stomach, and I start screaming. I see a man walking up my driveway. I start hyperventilating and crying, wondering how this person got here. My driveway is pretty long, thank God, but covered in trees. He is about 20 feet from the front door, and that thing is never locked, so I bolted downstairs and thankfully got there in time. It was right out of the movies, because as I was at the front door, locking it, I hear pounding on the door. Then I heard the door handle trying to be opened. I book it into the dining room and make sure the screen door is locked. I call my dad on the home phone. He starts swearing, not directed at me. What the fuck? I hear the man going through the garage and I'm freaking the fuck out, and he's trying to open the door. He eventually goes through the yard and seemed like he was looking for something. My dog is small, but she's barking up a storm. I tried to call my closest neighbor, who was a retired cop, but of course, he wasn't home. It felt like 30 minutes, but this guy finally leaves, and my dad and mom finally get home. Turns out, it was our very drunk neighbor. His house was like 7 miles away. He came into my yard looking for my dad, because he had driven his car into a ditch, and we lived on a tire farm. It wasn't uncommon for my dad to help these people. They were drunk all the time and always looked for rides. Anyways, my dad took his gun and went to their house. He threatened them and told them to never do shit like that again. If I remember right, they were trying to get into one of our vehicles. Scariest time of my life. Didn't stay home alone for a long time after that. Even thinking back now on it, my heart races. I don't think they would have done anything to me because they respected my dad, who is 6'5" and has anger issues, but at the time, I didn't know. To add, these people ended up making me a dream catcher and a travel blanket. They had about 10 people living in a 2-bedroom house of theirs, so I didn't recognize the man. Their house ended up getting raided for drugs or something. I'm a 22-year-old female. I live in a brand new apartment complex on the nice side of town. My city is pretty safe in general. This is the first time I've ever lived alone, so even though it's a safe area, I took some precautions, which included installing a Ring video doorbell. I've honestly never needed it in the 6 months I've lived here, as no unexpected visitors have come by, until last night. I was sitting home alone with my dog, working on some homework. It was nearly 8 p.m. and started to get dark. At night, I have my Ring set up to alert me when any person is detected outside my door. I received a notification of motion at my door, but I didn't think much of it. At 8 p.m., people are still walking down the halls, upstairs, etc. About 30 seconds later, I receive several loud knocks on my door, and my Ring is pushed rapidly 3 times. At this point, I'm spooked, and my dog is going nuts. I opened up the app to see 2 men standing outside my door. I debated internally on if I should open the door or not, but then I decided since it wasn't quite dark yet, and my neighbors were home, that it would be safe to do so. I slowly opened my door, just enough to put my head out. The man nearest to me says that they're with the wreath committee and complimented my wreath. He then went on to say that he was with the internet company and that he and his partner were here to offer me a deal. Now, my apartments have a very strict no tolerance policy for solicitation of any kind. We are told to immediately report that kind of activity. There are even signs posted all around stating that solicitation is prohibited by law here. I told the men that I was happy with my current service and was not interested in switching. The man who spoke first continued to speak about the great deal that they were offering. I continued to decline. He kept saying that he lived real close to here and that he would be happy to personally set up the service. He even offered to come inside and help me get started immediately. I declined his offer once more, and he reiterated that if I changed my mind to give him a call because he could be here in 5 minutes to help me out. He handed me a business card, and I tried to end the conversation again. He then tells me that he can't just walk away knowing I could get such a great deal, and I'm saying no to it. At this point, my instincts are telling me something's off. I decided to take a more aggressive approach and asked him if he was aware that my apartments have a strict no solicitation policy. He said he was aware, but that he cleared it with management. My apartment has a very small management team, and I know every single one of them. I asked him who he cleared it with. He said that he cleared it with the guys on the golf cart, Mike and Will, and that Mike was a great guy. Now, I knew it was all a lie. Our management team is only women here, and there's nobody named Mike or Will. In fact, only one man works here, and his name is Joe. I say, thanks, but I'm not interested, and I close the door and lock it loudly. I took a closer look at the business card he handed me. It had a logo and the name that he gave me, but the email was not a company email. It was a Yahoo account. The phone number also didn't appear when I searched it up for the company. I decided to post my encounter in the residents only Facebook page. A few other women commented that they had similar interactions tonight, but that they were given different names. The strange thing was, none of the men or couples were approached. It was only women they spoke with. It was only women that they spoke to. They talked to my upstairs neighbor and my neighbor across the hall, both girls, and didn't speak to either of the men who live on the same floor as me. Everyone was given different names, and everyone was offered vastly different deals. 2 women were told that they didn't have business cards to hand out. I thought it was worth Googling the guy's name to see if anything popped up. Sure enough, the second result was a report on the offender registry. Turns out, the man I spoke with at my door has 5 felonies and has served several years in jail for various charges: trafficking a controlled substance, theft by deception, and possession of stolen property. I knew it was him because there was a photo attached to the report. He's currently on parole until November. I'm not sure if I'm overthinking this situation because this is my first time experiencing something like this, but I know it didn't feel right. Maybe I'm just being dramatic or paranoid, but the entire thing feels more than a little bit off. I'm not sure if they were just scammers, if they were stalking places to rob, or worse. I reported this to the property manager who is investigating it today, but I am just a bit uneasy about the whole thing. If they return, I'll be calling the police for sure. As of the time I'm writing this, nothing else suspicious has happened, and I'm safe at the moment. I'll continue to stay vigilant. Be safe out there, guys. When I was really little, like 5 or 6, my parents left me home alone because they were going to be back in about 5 or 10 minutes. So I thought nothing of it, and I remember them saying don't answer the door unless I heard their voices. So about 7 minutes later I hear knocking, so I waited for my dad's or mom's voice, but didn't hear either. We had a peephole, so I looked through it, and I kid you not, there was some drunk in a clown costume at my door. I started screaming like I never screamed before. Obviously, the guy ran away as soon as he heard that. My parents came home, and I told them, and the cops got involved, etc. But God, that was horrifying. And I think that's what started my intense fear of clowns. I'm thankful that my parents said not to open the door unless it was them. I don't know what would have happened if they hadn't. This happened years ago when I was a college student. I lived in an old house with 10 other girls, 6 bedrooms, 3 fridges. It was actually a nice place to live. All of my roommates went home after the spring semester, so I was alone for a couple weeks as I was working instead of going home for the summer. One night, I dragged in after work and was annoyed to discover the doors unlocked. The landlord had let the carpet cleaners in that day, and I knew that they were coming, but no one locked up. It was well after dark, so I went in and locked the doors and glanced through to make sure I was actually alone. As I settled on my bed with a book, trying to relax and forget the house had been open all day, the doorbell rang. I went to the bottom of the stairs, and I could clearly see through the glass door that no one was there. I returned to my room, and the doorbell rang again. Again, no one was there. While I was standing there staring at the doorbell rang, and rang, and rang. I finally took the batteries out of it that were inside the bell unit and went back upstairs, now a bit shaken. It was a windy night, and I was hearing rattling, which I tried to ignore. I already knew I may not sleep that night. About 15 minutes later, I hear footsteps on the stairs, a clearly heavy, likely male footstep. I'm alone in the house. The only phone was on the top of the stairs. In order to call for help, I would have to move closer to the stairs. I've heard a fight or flight response before, but I had a reaction I never suspected. I froze. I couldn't move as I heard the footsteps getting closer and closer. My pepper spray was on my desk, mere feet away from me, but I couldn't move. Moments later, a figure dressed in black reached the top of the stairs and turned towards my room. Right before I screamed, I realized it was my boyfriend. He didn't think he would scare me, he just was having fun. Our doorbell was a remote, so he took it and was hiding in the bushes. Then he came through the downstairs room, where the window had been left open in the hot summer, and the screen was easily taken off. That was the last time any of the downstairs windows were left open or unlocked. Pepper spray and a knife made their way close to my bedside. I got him back in a rather immature way. I told his mom what he had done. For the record, that relationship didn't last much longer. When I was 11 years old, I got back from school and we had an exterminator at my house, a man who had came to my home before. I was doing my homework downstairs. He was upstairs and saying psst, psst, to get my attention from the stairwell landing. We had a nanny since my parents worked long hours, but she wasn't around, and I wasn't sure where she was, or if she ran out to run a quick errand or something. I went up the stairs thinking the exterminator needed help finding something or had a question. He brought me into the hall bathroom, touched my stomach on top of my clothes, and told me that it was nice. Then he asked if I gotten my period before. Thank God I said I had. He asked if anyone was in the house, which I replied my nanny was, and then he told me not to tell anyone that we spoke. Later that afternoon, the nanny saw how distressed I was, coaxed it out of me, and convinced me to tell my mom. We went to a detective, but were informed that this man had fled the country a few days later. A few years later, my mom saw him in our neighborhood, outside another home working for the same company, who said they had fired him after the allegations were made. This happened when I was 12 or 13 years old. A bit of a backstory. My dad was actively having an affair and had just been caught by my mom, who was also finishing her degree and had just lost her dad. The stress was just too much for her and she just snapped, for lack of better terms. She was diagnosed with PTSD at the time, and later, bipolar disorder. She has been treated with medicine and the occasional inpatient stays at behavioral hospitals ever since. At the time, she made an alias account to use the internet and used the name Lori, which was a twist on her middle name. I'd usually check the mail from my parents and noticed that she would occasionally get mail and packages to her pseudonym and also to her real name. One night, we were all asleep when the doorbell rang. My dad and I both got up at the same time to check, and the doorbell rang again. We went to our front door, my dad looking through the peephole, and I was checking the nearby window. I remember seeing a man in his 30s or 40s, very shaggy and disheveled. His eyes were completely bloodshot, and he was wobbly, obviously intoxicated. My dad has a booming voice and asked aggressively through the door who this man was. I'll never forget him slurring. It's me, Tom. I'm here for Lori. I just want to talk to Lori. Please get Lori. My dad was fairly oblivious and didn't notice the name or make a connection, so he told the guy to fuck off, and the dude left on his bicycle. And to this day, I don't know if he actually knew my mom, or if he wandered the neighborhood and maybe read the names off the mail in the mailbox, or if my mom met him online and gave out our address. It never happened again, but I remember it being especially creepy because I was young and watching my parents' marriage strained by constant fighting and deception, and my mother's behavior becoming more erratic as her mental health deteriorated. It made every day feel so scary and unpredictable. So this happened to me when I was 11 years old. I was a shy kid, so I didn't usually play outside with the other kids in my small neighborhood. One day, a girl showed up at my house and asked to play with me. I instantly said no due to my shyness. My mom kept insisting on me to play with her, so she let her in. I remember sitting in my living room with my head in my shirt because I didn't want to play with her. Strangely enough, she didn't leave until another good 45 minutes had passed. It was quite strange because now I'm 21. I realized I'd never seen that girl around my neighborhood at all, and I knew those kids around my area pretty well since I lived on a dead-end street. I never saw that girl again. I still would think about it to this day, and out of all the kids around there, why did she pick me if she never saw me playing with any other kids? A few weeks ago, my house got hit hard with COVID, so my kids and I were hanging out at home. I had my front door opened because I was waiting on the schoolwork to be dropped off. I see a car pull up in my driveway. It was going very slow, and I went on the porch thinking it was their schoolwork. To my surprise, it was a man. I was expecting a woman, and he started with, "Hey, I have a pretty weird question." I said, "Okay, what's that?" He started telling me that his wife grew up here. I knew it was a lie. My house hasn't been here long enough for that. He continues with, "She wanted me to walk inside the house and look around." I said no. I told him that we actually have COVID at the moment. He kept on insisting. Then he said, "Okay, I lied. She didn't grow up here. She was assaulted in 2010 and wants to come and look around." Again, I told him no. We went back and forth for 3 or 4 minutes. He even offered to pay me. He eventually gave up and got in his car. I locked the door and looked out my window while he sat in his car. A tree was blocking the view for the most part, but I could see someone else in the car. Something about him wasn't right. The vibes he gave me sent chills down my body. He also told me that he'd be back. I have small cameras, and I called the police, but they couldn't locate him. I suffer from anxiety and have 3 small children. Since this happened, I haven't slept well. I'm so worried that he'll show back up during the night. I live in a safe area for the most part, but on a busy road. I don't believe he was telling the truth, and I do believe he'll be back. This happened to me when I was about 7 years old. It was already 8 p.m. and I was on my way home. On my way, there was a big wide tunnel, which was very dimly lit. At the end of the tunnel stood a man in his 50s. He was about 6 feet tall and a bit smelly. His clothes were torn and very dirty. As soon as he saw me, he spoke to me. I can't remember exactly what he said to me, but the typical questions like, "What is your name? How old are you? What are you doing out so late?" and so on. Thinking back, I was not afraid. He seemed friendly to me. I didn't understand how dangerous this situation could be. It was dark and we were both alone. He walked me the rest of the way home and kept asking questions. When we reached my house, my father opened the door for me. The stranger explained that he wanted to accompany me because it was very dangerous for me to be out so late. My father was a bit disturbed and told him to fuck off immediately, otherwise he would call the police. The stranger looked at me, smiled, and left without saying another word. My father locked the door, and I never saw the stranger again. This encounter is not too scary, but I'm glad the stranger had no bad intentions. He had every opportunity to kidnap me, or worse. I was naive, and it could have got me killed. I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I've been deer hunting and been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I like to hunt boar. For those of you who don't know, boar is a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that costs literally twice as much as the rifle you're mounting it to is worth it. But I did it. I took it to the range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy to find spots that I could set up in that overlooked a large, easy to navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me just tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I spotted multiple deers, but they were out of season. And like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot that I had seen days earlier. Probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do, and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After about an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned to me. The spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbits or owls. The deer that I had seen were 100 yards away from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night, but lively in the day? I set up around 10 p.m., and it was around 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left and taking some practice shots. I heard the crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned the scope over, and I saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermoscope, kind of like black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear, it was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that the game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming from the road where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public land. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sight and noticed he was naked, no shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something, twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one that I had been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something that I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it. A voice coming from that direction. A very compelling female voice. Help, I'm lost. There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sight was trained in the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? Help, please, I can't walk. The voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land at ease for a naked person, so good that I mistook him for a bear. That's a fucking trap. This guy's trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off of him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw a smile. The thermal scope has an effect that makes the animal's eyes appear white. How in the hell did he hear me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. Fuck off! I screamed in that direction. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. He was easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head in the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. The next one will fuck you up. Go away. He stayed on all fours, and at this time, I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass, like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice cracked a little on my last warning. I was terrified. The standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted to the left towards the tree line, opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving that fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked up another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap it out for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in his weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear in the cab and kept my rifle on the passenger seat as I sped off. For the longest time, I told the story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting alone at night. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told the story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him because the spot that we were camping was technically the same forest I had seen that bastard, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked, his mom, my cousin, had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole on these scary stories. I'm not saying what I saw was definitely a wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such things do exist, I may have dodged quite a bullet that night. Or maybe it was just a tweaker, being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, I thought I'd share. This took place 2 years ago. I just recently turned 19. I was a college freshman going to school in a small town in South Louisiana. My parents were the pull yourself up by your bootstraps type. Having done their best to instill the strong work ethic in me growing up, they'd expect me to pay for my own tuition, with no help from them whatsoever. Not gonna lie, I was a little annoyed at first. I didn't mind paying my own way, but I was concerned about the impact working all those hours would have on my social life, as I wanted the full college experience. I started working part-time as a waiter at a local seafood restaurant. Shifts were limited and tips were scarce. My dad recommended supplementing my income through yard work, saying I could use his riding lawnmower and leaf blower. Anyway, I started making pretty good money mowing lawns, managing to snag a few clients through word of mouth. My best friend Blaze was working as a cashier at a local corner store while he attended a nearby college. He happily recommended my lawn care service to any customer or coworkers. I was ecstatic. I was not only making enough money to pay for school, but I even had a little left over to get my beat up old truck some much needed repairs. He told me about a guy he worked with at the store, a slightly older guy, mid-20s I believe. His name was Alex. He was quiet, didn't smile much, a bit of a loner type. It didn't matter to me, I was only looking to make cash. He said he needed someone to mow his front and backyard, as he didn't really have the time. He didn't really elaborate to what he did outside of working at the grocery store, but I guessed it wasn't much. So my friend gave me Alex's number. No big deal, right? After all, I was going to give it out to anyone who might have been even the least bit interested in my services. Turns out that was the start of what would be a year-long nightmare. Alex texted me on Saturday morning, a day after my friend and I had talked. It was pretty cordial and simple. Nothing more than, "Hey man, what's up? Your friend told me that you cut grass." I gave him an affirmative, and then asked if he would like me to come over, and how frequently, given how often it rained here in South Louisiana. He simply told me to come over later that day, and that he wasn't sure if he could afford me on a weekly basis. Whatever, I thought. Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement. I immediately hopped out of bed, got dressed, and drove to where he lived, which was located on the far side of town, across the bayou. His house wasn't located in the nicest of neighborhoods. Many of the houses were run down, seemingly in a state of disrepair. The yards were thick with grass, knee-high length if I remember correctly. I didn't think any of those people could afford to pay me even a quarter of what I charged at the time, which wasn't much, at around $45. I finally made my way to Alex's place, which didn't look all bad compared to the other houses. Horizontal siding painted a soft pastel blue, sat atop dark gray bricks, with a cracked bay window in the front. I parked my truck on the side of the street and shot him a text stating that I had arrived. He came out of his house in a wrinkled t-shirt and pajama pants, looking as if he just woke up. "Hey," I said, smiling as I usually do. "Rough night?" I asked jokingly. He didn't respond, just blinked and ran his hand through his dark blonde hair for what felt like an eternity, but realistically could have been less than a minute. We both stood in complete silence. His dark green eyes bore into me. I avert my gaze, catching sight of a fallen branch that had broken off a large oak tree in his front yard. We had just got hit by a hurricane a few days earlier. "So how'd you guys weather the storm?" I asked, my eyes affixed to the broken branches and scattered leaves. He simply shrugged and said, "Okay." It occurred to me that I might have been speaking to the wrong person. "You're Alex, right? You work with my friend at Village Market?" He nodded. What the fuck was with this guy? I thought. I just kept smiling, as I always did when I would get especially nervous. I told him that I have a lot of clients to get to that day, and that I better get started as soon as possible. He just nodded and pointed to the back gate on the side of the house. He started walking, and I followed. It was a sizable backyard, children's toys scattered almost everywhere. There was a cluttered tool shed next to the fence far off to the left. I did my best to hide my disgust as I nearly stepped in some dog shit. It was weird. The backyard was like a minefield of dog shit, yet no dog to be found. I brushed the thought away and just went to work. Alex didn't bother me or really interact with me at all that day. He seemed really friendly via text. I just chalked it up to him being really socially awkward, like my friend said. He paid me once I finished mowing his lawn, and then I went on my way. Later that night, he texted me again. He apologized for how he acted, saying that he was just tired from the night before and that he wasn't sleeping well and under a lot of stress. I replied that I understand completely and asked him if he needed me next week. He ignored my question and asked if I could suggest anything from Pelicans on the Bayou, the restaurant where I'd been working. At first I was taken aback by the question. I wasn't sure how he knew I worked there, but then it occurred to me that my friend must have told him. I recommended the battered chicken wings, and he thanked me. We started texting back and forth the next few days. He asked me questions about my life, nothing too personal. He'd make inappropriate jokes, nothing I couldn't handle though. He seemed like a pretty cool guy when we talked via text. Strangely, most of our conversations happened late at night or early in the morning hours on weekends. Again, I didn't mind, because he was a paying customer and I was a friendly guy. About a month had passed when my friend Blaze had sent me a screenshot of a text he received from Alex. It was supposedly a text sent by me, saying all sorts of horrible things to Alex, like, "He's a fucking loser who'd never get laid and needed to get a real job." Shit like that. I couldn't believe what I was reading. In the fake text, he even threw some homophobic slurs, which offended me greatly since I had a gay uncle that I was really close to. I decided it would be best just to ignore him. This guy was clearly unwell, trying to start shit with someone he barely knew. He texted me a few days later, acting as if he'd done nothing wrong. The text kept coming. He chatted with me like we were longtime friends. My patience grew thin. I finally snapped and messaged him back. "Dude, I know what you did. If you know what's best for you, you'll leave me alone." He feigned ignorance at first, and then proceeded to apologize profusely. I didn't care at that point. I didn't know that guy at all. He was nothing to me. I was busy with my school and work, and I had absolutely no time for any of his drama. I blocked his number. I thought I was over, but I couldn't have been more wrong. A few weeks later, I received another text, this time from a completely different number. It was Alex, again with more apologies. I blocked the number. I figured that he would finally take the hint and leave me alone. He didn't. He ended up adding me on Snapchat using the fake profile. I accepted his request. The name looked familiar, so I thought nothing of it. He asked me if I still worked at Pelicans. I told him that I didn't, as I kept cutting my hours. He then asked if I was still cutting grass. I told him that I was, but for only close friends and family members, as I had a bad experience with a former client. He then proceeds to ask me for details. By then, I figured out it was Alex. I told him to leave me alone, and that if he didn't, I was going to the police. I then received a text from my girlfriend at the time, asking me if I knew a guy named Troy. He supposedly saw me cheating with another girl at some party. I told her everything that was going on. She wasn't sure if she believed me, as I did have a history of playing the field. I told her that I was completely faithful to her, and this guy was fucking nuts. She told me that I better start collecting evidence, taking screenshots of his texts he sent, and that's exactly what I started doing. Most of the texts were pretty benign, just more of him asking me for forgiveness. Then late, one Saturday night, he sent me another text. This time, it was a picture of my house. I was drinking with a few buddies of mine at the time, Blaze included. I immediately showed them the text. He suggested that we call the cops. Some of my more aggressive friends suggested we go outside and beat his ass. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't really want to get the cops involved, but I certainly didn't want to go outside, not knowing if he had a weapon of some kind. I told everyone to just stay in the house and not to do anything. I peeked through the blinds and saw nothing. He couldn't have been there for long. He must have left as soon as he had taken the picture. I didn't hear from him for a few weeks. Blaze, along with the other two cashiers, asked to not work the same shift with Alex. I was hoping maybe it was finally over. Maybe he moved on to someone else. Then on a cold, early October evening, I came home from class to find my mother shaken. I'd never seen her like that before. I asked her what was wrong. She was speechless, trembling almost. She showed me what she found laying on her front porch. It was a large manila envelope with Instagram pictures of me, with my eyes scratched out and red X's drawn on my face. A chill went down my spine. I don't think I've ever been this afraid in my life. Like I had never known real fear up until that point. My mom insisted that we go to the police. I agreed. She ended up talking to a close family friend who knew the sheriff. A couple of officers came to the house, took our statements, told us that if Alex ever came by again, to call them immediately. I didn't hear from Alex again after that. He was fired from the grocery store. The owner caught him stealing from the register. Life went on, months went by, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. Then one day when I was running errands for my mom, I saw Alex standing on the side of the road. He was holding up a clipboard sign, asking for money. He locked eyes with me. They were cold and emotionless. I could feel that familiar shiver creeping up my spine. It was as if everything had came to a complete standstill. After I regained my senses, I sped off, hoping that would be the last I ever see of him. I worked at a gas station when I was 18, and I posted the other day about a coworker who I found out was a Nazi. I have a ton of stories from my short time working there, so I wanted to share another one. This story concerns a friend of mine whose permission I have to post. I lived in a country area with a ton of backwoods type. A lot of them are great people, just the old-fashioned working type, but a lot of them are shady or have backwards ideologies, and everyone needs to get gas, so this led to a lot of creepy encounters. There was a notorious old man, Charles, who was known to be a perv and always extremely rude to any male employee, but overly friendly to female employees. If I was working, Charles would come in with an attitude just to complain and be a dick for no reason. He did not like me. Well, my friend Kayla from high school started working there, and she was 18 as well. She was the youngest female employee. Charles became fixated on her, even though he could be her grandpa. Charles would try to wait off to the side anytime Kayla was working so that he could just talk to her. Would try to buy her things, giving her gross compliments about shit like the way her jeans fit. The store managers, 2 women, were on her side, but we tried to tell the main manager, and he told her just to ignore him. Well, one night, Kayla and I were working the 2 to 10 shift together. It was around 9 p.m. I saw Charles coming, so I told Kayla to go in the back. He came in and demanded to talk to her, yelling at me, making gross comments about how he would change her life and how he knew she was there. He even threatened me. He had a large hunting knife clipped to his belt. The main manager told us not to call the cops on him, but I decided fuck it. And I told Charles that I'm calling the cops. He left but was found wandering the streets nearby. The cops took us seriously and the store decided to ban him permanently. He ended up being charged with disturbing the peace, and thankfully, we never saw him again. The main manager ended up apologizing for not taking us seriously and said that we did the right things by calling the cops. So at least there was that. We looked up his name and found out that he was a registered sex offender, which makes the story even worse. Just for a fun little extra fact, he has like 20 mugshots that were found easily online and was laughing in all of them. So I don't think he cares about the repercussions of his actions. For context, I live pretty far in the middle of nowhere, and last night my brother visited me. We had planned to drink, but eventually ended up taking a late night stroll in the woods, cause why not? We had taken late night walks plenty of times, just with the difference that we usually hang out at his new place downtown, where there's no such thing as the large wooded areas. So yeah, we were pretty excited to go into the forest for a change. As we were making our way up the hill, lost in deep conversation, my brother abruptly stops in his tracks. Before he could explain himself, I knew exactly what he had heard. I heard it as well the second time. There was a very quiet, yet very distinctive, wet horse coughing, and it sounded like it wasn't too far away, maybe about a couple feet. Remember, it was past 1 a.m. and like I said, this was the middle of nowhere. It is extremely rare to run across another person in these woods, even at daytime. So without reconsidering once, we were like fuck this, and turned around to get the fuck out of there. The weird shit didn't stop there. As we were finally back on the narrow dirt road leading home, we saw a bright light yards behind us. At first, we thought it was someone riding their bike with some kind of single light attached to it. When we realized that the light didn't move at all. In fact, it only seemed to get brighter to the point where it looked more like an actual truck headlight than your average flashlight. We eventually pointed our own flashlights back at it, and after a few seconds, the strange light went out just as suddenly as it had came on. I'm not sure if we heard anything after that, but at that point, all we wanted to do was get inside and away from whoever was out there with us. We had also heard some demonic screeching coming from somewhere in the woods at the same time, but I'm sure it was just a deer trying to attract a mate. Great fucking timing. Well, anyway, that's it for today. Thought I'd share a little creepy encounter on here. I've had my fair share of wild experiences. I can share more if people are interested. But this story in particular is about a killer in the making I dated in my sophomore year of high school. I didn't date him by choice. In fact, I already had a boyfriend who I loved very much. I had started dating him in May. He graduated, and I continued high school in the next year. That's when this creep took an interest in me. I was never pretty or popular, but this year I had decided to put in some effort. I dressed nice, wore makeup, and used contacts instead of wearing my glasses. That's when a fairly popular boy noticed me. He started chatting with me and eventually asked me to homecoming. I was flattered, but of course I said no, since I was very happy with my boyfriend. Well, he didn't take too kindly to being rejected. He proceeded to pull out a knife, one of the 3 he carried with him daily, and told me that I had to break up with my boyfriend and go out with him instead, or he'd kill my boyfriend, my family, and eventually me. I was terrified, so I did what he said. I broke up with my boyfriend on the phone, and of course, I couldn't tell him why. He got upset and hung up the phone. Now that I was single, the creep got happier. He stopped threatening me and treated me like a girlfriend. He was pretty nice to me, but I knew if I ever tried to leave him or anything, he would hurt me. If I did something he didn't like, he would hurt me. I became afraid to go to school. I had to do my makeup right. I couldn't wear my glasses. I had to dress girly and pretty. We went to homecoming in matching colors, and it was hard to tell from the outside how fucked up things were. I thought maybe I could do this and it would be okay, until I got a strange text. A number I didn't know texted me and told me to tell my boyfriend, the creep, that if he didn't pay extra for the knife he was trying to buy, he'd kill me with it. That was it. I knew I had to get out. I ran to a teacher I trusted, and she helped me break up with him in a crowded hallway. He cursed, punched the locker so hard he dented it, then stormed off. I thought it was over, but it was far from it. He started to post threats on social media. I went to the principal about it as I started to fear for my life. Since they weren't very specific, she said that there wasn't anything she could do. So I went on in fear for weeks until he posted a very specific death threat. There was no argument that he meant it for me. I went back to the principal and the police got involved. 2 men were assigned to escort me to classes and protect me while I was at school, as they figured out what to do with the creep. It was several weeks before they took action. His punishment? A 40-day suspension. That's it. But at least for those 40 days I could breathe. Now it was over. Except, a few days after his suspension, I was in the bathroom by the cafeteria. I was the only one in there until another girl walked in. She stood next to me and told me that I shouldn't have said anything, that I was lucky for him to pick me. She started getting angry and calling me a bitch. Turned out, she practically worshipped this guy and was jealous of me. Suddenly, she pulled out a knife of her own and lunged at me. I managed to dodge her attack, but she managed to stab me one time in the shoulder. I freaked out and I bolted away, back to my friends, clutching my bleeding shoulder. They tried to ask what happened, but I couldn't stop crying long enough to tell them. She moved to the other side of the country before I could take action against her. With that, it was really over. The creep moved too, so he could have a fresh start, I guess, and I went on with my life. This happened almost 3 years ago now, but I still have nightmares. I'm afraid someday he's going to come back to find me and finish what he started. When I hear someone say his name, even if they aren't talking about him, I freak. If I see something that reminds me of him, even a little, I run. It seriously fucked me up. I don't know how to stop being scared. At least I made it out alive. This was about 25 years ago when I was a young teen, 13 or 14. I'm a female and I'm 38 now. I was dating someone in a rough part of my town, in the UK, and had walked down to his house to hang out. I had left his house to go home around 4 or 5 p.m. and was walking through a small wooded area when something told me to look behind me. I looked behind me to see a guy following me, carrying a baseball bat. I started walking faster and faster, but he kept pace with me, and just remained carrying his bat over his shoulder like he was gonna swing it. I confronted him once we were out of the wooded area and asked him what he wanted, but he just stared at me blankly, so I told him to straight up stop following me. I started walking off in a rather quick speed, and he continued to follow me. I lived in a very small town, but it had a number of houses that I could stop at. I knocked on several houses on my route home, but no one was answering, and I didn't want the creep knowing where I lived, so I just kept walking around and going down alleys into people's gardens, but he'd be waiting for me when I thought I evaded him. I ended up going back to my house, hoping that my dad would be home so that he could deal with this creep. But when I got home, my dad wasn't home. I told my mom about it, and she looked out the window. He was there, but all he did was nod his head to her, and then he walked off. I told my boyfriend about the incident, and he went mental over it and asked around to see who it could have been. He found out who it was, gave the guy a polite warning, and started walking me home just in case. I never saw that stalker again. My boyfriend and I split because of distance as I moved to another city when I finished high school. We do still talk occasionally. He's happily married with 4 kids now, and I'm a single parent to 3 kids. It still gives me a shiver down my spine when I think about it though. So this is a repost of a story from March 2019, but I just went to court to testify against him today, so I figured I might as well let you have the whole story. So I lived in a town with 60,000 people, and I've been living and working there for 1.5 years. I don't know many people here, as I work all day and have schoolwork in my free time. Because of this, I've been trying to meet new people and found a Facebook group wanting to hang out. One was suggesting a pre-party before going out, and we were just 6 girls in total. At around 3 a.m., 3 of us decided to go home. One took a taxi, and the other one lives like 3 minutes away from me, so we walked. We were talking, laughing for a few minutes before she went inside, and I started to walk home rather happy and still a bit drunk. I suddenly noticed footsteps and got a bit paranoid, as you do being a woman in your early 20s walking home in the middle of the night. 50 meters further ahead is a public swimming pool, and they still had the lights on, so I decided to leave the sidewalk because usually people are just on their way home themselves and will just keep walking. Not in this case though. As I reached the entrance with all the lights, I turned around and this guy was literally 3 steps behind me. Black male, 35 to 40, slim, with a head strangely small compared to his body, little to no hair, like 5'9", and with creepy nearly white eyes that stood out next to his dark complexion. I asked him why he was following me, and he just mumbled something I couldn't make out. He could have been an immigrant though, so maybe he didn't know Danish. I told him that he shouldn't be following me, and that I'd like him to keep going, but he gave me no response. I then told him that I didn't like being followed and to please move on. He just smiled a creepy smile, and out of nowhere grabbed my hair on the back of my head and pulled me towards him harder than I thought was possible for his size. I fell on top of him, and he got knocked out when his head hit the pavement. I ran across the parking lot to a road at a safe distance when I called 112 while still keeping an eye on him. Really wanted to just run home, but I was also terrified of me landing on him might have killed him or whatever. He attempted to get up a few times, and I was about to run, but I saw the lights from the ambulance coming down the road, so I stayed, and one of them came to check up on me while we waited for the police to arrive. I'm fine. I just have a sore scalp and a bruise on my left arm where I landed on him, but I'm sure he got the biggest headache ever. Karma is a bitch, and here I thought I had ran out of dumb luck a long time ago. Edit. I think I saw him at work yesterday. I work at a pharmacy, so if it was him, I hope he just came in for something for that headache. I looked over the camera footage, and literally the only thing that didn't make it seem like it was him was that he had very dark eyes. But I guess color context is always an option. Second edit. Passed him today on my way home from a run. I was literally 100 meters from my flat, in another direction compared to the swimming pool. I tried not to make eye contact or look too much in his direction, but he was wearing the same exact outfit. He didn't follow me, but I just hope that means that he didn't remember how I looked. Third edit. Never mind. I walked past him today on the street outside the pharmacy as a colleague and I were going to grab some lunch. When I realized it was him, I just looked at my colleague and pretended to be very much into our conversation, but I could feel him staring at me the whole time. I waited a little longer than I usually would to have a second look, and he was staring. I felt like I got busted or something, and like I've just confirmed to him that I was the girl that he attacked. It's honestly a strange feeling because my feelings are currently switching between paranoid, scared, and angry. More than anything, I really want to punch him in his face for making me feel so unsafe. I doubt that would end well for me though. December 2020. Guess it's time for another edit, in case people are still wondering what happened with the case. So apparently he has a few different charges, and today they decided to have me come to court as a witness. Don't know all the charges, but I'm not allowed to know until he's being sentenced, which might take a while. Anyway, they read aloud from the police report, and I'm both confused and annoyed as it doesn't sound like what happened at all. They said that he was drunk and sat on a pillar near me, and Lovely attempted to stroke my hair, which I didn't like, then fell and bumped his head and got knocked out, and that I had left and called the ambulance for him. Like literally what the fuck. Also found out that he probably didn't understand me that evening as he needed a translator today. But I still feel kinda proud that I was brave enough to confront him with the fact that he was following me and to tell him to keep going. At least something positive came out of it. So for background, I used to sleep in a boarding school while I attended high school. That night they asked us to be in front of the school at 4 a.m. to take the bus that would have taken us to the airport. I have asked my mother if she could bring me there, but she wasn't comfortable going into the city with a car at night, and neither was I walking by myself in the unknown city, but I guess she didn't care that much. So it was around 3:40 in the morning. I hadn't slept worth shit because I had bad pizza, indigestion. I had spent the last 5 hours holding my stomach on my bed, covered in sweat, so yeah, that night didn't start off well, but I decided to go take the bus anyways. I didn't want to miss the big trip, although the idea of getting on a plane scared me more than anything. I got up, took my luggage and backpack, and started going towards the city center. The streets were completely empty. Every now and again a car would pass the street, but no one else was around. I was sprinting down the street where the rehabilitation home was. I have nothing against rehabilitation, but call it prejudice. I didn't want to meet anyone who had something to do with drugs and alcohol at 4 a.m. I managed to get in front of the school all in one piece, and there was not a soul around. Where were my classmates? I sat on the bench and started playing with my hands. Sure enough, luck was never a thing. I started hearing some movement behind me. I turned, and the man was slowly crossing the plaza, headed towards me. I ignored him and kept looking at my hands nervously. He definitely was approaching me in a very slow, calm walk. He was wearing a windproof jacket, had gray hair, a wild afro, and a beard. Some of his teeth were missing. He had a friendly smile. "Hey you brother." I covered my face between my neck and my jacket and my hood. Hey dude. I'm sorry to bother you, but you see, I need some money. Some money, yeah? As soon as his hand touched my shoulder, I jumped up and backed down. He took me by my shoulders as if we were long lost friends and proceeded. "I need some money for fries. There's a van that sells them, there, down the street. I just need a few coins for fries." There was in fact a van that sold all kinds of fried and bakery sort of food. The thing is, they're not open before 9 a.m., and it was 4 a.m. The smell of liquor on his breath made me panic. He could have easily punched me and robbed me. He didn't look like a violent guy, but I didn't know what to expect. I thought quickly. I had some spare money. I'd give him some, as I didn't want to piss him off. I told him that I didn't have any cash on me because I was going to the airport, but that I had some coins in my pocket that I'd be glad to give him. This prevented him of seeing my wallet, and sounded like a friendly compromise. He seemed grateful. He took the few coins I had for my coffee. The thing is, it was not over, and it got weirder for both of us. He started overthanking me, a row of thank yous and kind words, and I need to reward you. He was heating his hands over me, and I didn't know what to do. I was so overwhelmed. I hugged him and said that it was no problem. I locked my hands after a few pats on his back and backed up. Okay, what the fuck just happened? I anxiously looked around to spot a classmate at the end of the road with what I remember being her sister. After a while, they noticed me too, but didn't do anything, just stared. The guy thanked me again and said that he needed to show me one more thing, then grabbed my arm and dragged me a few steps. I pointed my feet at the ground, losing my confidence and looking friendly. Please, I gave you money already. You asked for money and I just gave it to you. Now I have stuff to do. He pulled me another time, then let go of my arm and said that he wanted to reward me and that I will see. He then asked me to stay still and wait for him to come back. He then left. A couple of my classmates came the next minute. I was still shocked. I didn't know what the fuck that man wanted, and I was anxious I would see him turning the corner. I then laughed it off with some friends, trying to cope with whatever had happened. A few laughed in disbelief, and one girl took me to the side and asked if I was okay. I wasn't really sure, and she knew it. The classmate I saw at the end of the street said that she saw the man dragging me, and if he would have done something, she would have intervened. I was, and still am pissed off at her. This man was looking for some booze or whatever, and probably wouldn't have hurt me. But what if he had a knife? If he punched me? If he robbed me? If he managed to drag me away from the street? It was already time to intervene, and I can't help thinking that she was just being a coward, and I will never forget. This happened years ago, when I was 16 years old. I was walking home and it was around midnight. There were no people around me besides this very short dude that was walking right behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it until I heard him speaking. No other voice, just the one. But he could have been talking on the phone, right? I get this very weird feeling that something isn't right, so I turn around, and sure enough, he was speaking to me. I can't make out what he's saying because he was speaking another language. My best bet was to cross the street, but he did as well. We repeated the street crossing a couple times until we got to my block. Now my street is a very little narrow street that is part of the old part of town, and it's very dark. If I go into it, he could very possibly hurt me, and no one would be there to help. So I decide to walk a little bit further, where there's a bakery that's 24/7, and it's always packed with people. I stop right in front of it and act like I'm waiting for someone to come out. The guy sees this, and he walks into the bakery and starts looking around, and I finally see him under the bakery lights. He looked disturbed and very dirty. He was short, maybe around 5'2". He was wearing some clothes that were dirty and worn out, and by the look of the customers, I could tell that he smelled very bad. I assume he decided not to be suspicious, and he walks out and starts walking away from me. He didn't know that my street was a couple steps behind me, and I guess he thought once he left, I would keep walking in the same direction. I saw him hiding behind a tree not very far from me. I take this opportunity and slowly start walking backwards to where the street starts, never turning my back to where he is. This was my time to get a little bit ahead. So I start running for my life until I get to my house. I lock the doors with all the lights turned off, and I peek out the window. He is running and looking everywhere, trying to find where I went. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if I hadn't reacted the way I did. But anyways, I have more stories similar to this because Being a woman in my country is very unsafe. Probably the wildest thing that's ever happened to me with a complete stranger. Now, this encounter was not in person, just to note that. I was 14 when this happened, and the man in question was in his mid-30s. I had a large friend group at the time, but out of the 10 people in it, I was only really friends with one of them. All the other ones were his friends, but they were always around. This particular day, one of his friends asked me if he can use my phone to call his coworker because he needed to tell him that he wasn't going to make it to work. I agreed and handed him my phone without thinking twice about it. He says his coworker isn't picking up and gives me back my phone. A couple hours later, my phone rings and I pick up. I don't recognize the voice, but the caller says I called him. I quickly realize what it was and I tell him my friend's name and that he called. The caller thanks me and hangs up. I thought that would be the end of it, but boy, I was wrong. Almost right away, I started getting texts from this number, telling me my voice sounded sexy. I just ignored all of them. The next day I get a text from him. "Do you not want to talk to me?" I responded with a simple no. He replies, "Well, if you don't want to text me, Sarah, then I could just come by." He knew my address and my name. I am terrified at this point, so I asked my friend if he gave any information about me to his coworker. He tells me that the guy asked him whose phone he called from, and he gave him my name. He asked him if I lived close, and he gave him my actual address. My friend also mentions his age when I told him that he's texting me, but he said that I'm overreacting and that a 30-year-old wouldn't even bother with me. So I text him back saying that if he has that information on me, he must know my age too, right? He says he doesn't mind my age as long as I don't. What follows is a month of constant calls every single day. He would get angry if I didn't pick up and start texting me nasty things and calling me names. Please don't judge me for not calling the police or telling my parents. I was only 14 and scared that he would hurt me or my family. One day it all came to an explosion that was building up for months. He kept calling my phone until my younger brother got annoyed and answered it, telling him to leave me alone. He had no idea it was a stalker. I just told him it was some random person calling me. He then sent me a couple texts telling me to get ready because he was going to kill me and my brother for speaking to him like that. I went outside to cry, and that's when my neighbor saw me crying. He was older than me, but his brothers were the same age. He asked me why I was crying, and I told him everything. I just couldn't keep it in any longer. He was calm and told me to give him the guy's number, which I did. About 15 minutes later, my phone started blowing up with text. He was calling me a whore. He then said, "You have the nerve to send the bastard that you're having sex with and have them call me?" He was extremely angry. He somehow knew where I was going the next day. It was something I planned for months with my friends. He told me that that was where he would kill me, and I would pay for being such a little bitch. I still went because we had been planning it for months. Thankfully, my neighbor suggested to go with me and keep a distance just in case the threats were real. They weren't. He never showed up that day, and I'm so thankful he didn't. That was the end of the calls and texts. To this day, I'm still terrified that he will somehow see me outside and possibly hurt me. One phone call ruined many months for me. Okay, so this took place a long time ago. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I was probably between 7 and 9. My family and I were all queued up at the bus stop when this guy approaches us asking for money. He said something about he hasn't eaten in a while and that he doesn't have a single cent on him. This is pretty normal where I live, so we weren't exactly freaked out or anything at the time. So my mom dug her hand in her purse and handed him some cash and wished him well. The adults returned to their conversation, but I noticed that he hadn't left. What's weird is that we were in the middle of the queue, so it couldn't have been that he was just queuing up after us. Everyone else eventually notices this and tries not to acknowledge whatever this was because, I guess, everyone probably just assumed that he wasn't exactly sane at this point. When the bus arrived, we all hopped on, and me being the child I was, I ran all the way to the back to sit alone. Those seats were considered the best seats. Then I see the same guy board the bus and walk in my direction. I immediately grabbed my grocery bag and placed it on the seat next to me because I didn't want him to sit there, because I had a feeling he would. Sure enough, he stops right next to me and just stares down at me. At this point, I was completely creeped out, mainly because I had no idea what he wanted. Everyone began to turn and stare, so I lifted the grocery bag and he immediately plunges down right next to me. I looked through the window throughout the whole trip, which wasn't long, about 10 minutes. I was seated on the inside next to the window, so when it was my stop, he had to either get up or turn his body to let me slide through to get out. Surprisingly, that's exactly what he did when we got to our stop. Thank God he hadn't followed us then. Another thing I noticed that he didn't have a card and he didn't pay for the fare when he got on the bus and somehow got away with it. Last night, I was scared out of my mind. As I was on my way home, a man came up to me and started talking to me. He said something along the lines of, "Hey beautiful," and whatnot. I replied back, "Get away from me." I then noticed he had a cup of alcohol in his hand, and I immediately regretted saying anything. He turned aggressive right away and proceeded to call me a stupid dumb white bitch and to get the fuck out of so-and-so. I diagonally crossed the street, and he continued down and crossed another street, but he kept screaming at me, saying that I'm a dumb bitch and that he was gonna beat my ass and mess me up. Being a dummy and having too much pride, I yelled back, "Suck my dick and shut the fuck up." Clearly, I should have not aggravated him more, but it was in the heat of the moment. There were a few people around, so I felt okay, and he was walking away. But when I turned the street, all the other people were gone. That's when he started following me. I could hear him screaming slurs behind me and his footsteps stomping down the pavement. I was so scared. I started to speed up my walking, but I didn't want him to know that I realized that he was right behind me. I thought to knock on the neighbor's door for help, but I was too afraid. I called my mom and started crying on the phone because I didn't know what would happen. She thought I was pranking her. I could hear him getting closer, and I grabbed my keys and bolted to my front door. Both of my hands were shaking so bad that I couldn't even unlock it. I started banging on it for someone to open it, and finally they did. I got in and fell on the hallway floor, just crying. I looked up and saw a shadow at the door and started screaming my ass off, only to realize it was my roommate checking to see what happened. I felt so much relief in that moment. I'm really scared to leave my house now because he knows where I live. I just hope he was too drunk to remember anything. I feel really traumatized. This is a story about the time I had a full-blown stalker, and everyone knew and just pretended it was fine. When I was 16, I moved into a new apartment. It was a huge apartment complex. I had previously only lived in a very rural area in the middle of nowhere. So one night, I decided to get changed while dancing in front of my full-wall window at night. The window acted like a mirror due to the light inside and the darkness outside. So I did an entire striptease in front of that thing. Yes, I was stupid. When I was done, I looked out my window for whatever reason, and I saw a silhouette of a man standing in his window across the street on a higher floor. I shut my blinds but thought nothing of it. A few days later, I get a call. The person tells me that he loves me. He knows my name, my mom's name, my address, what school I went to, and obviously my phone number. He knew everything. I told my mom about the stripping incident and about the phone call. She brushed it off. One time, my boyfriend was over, and the stalker called me crying, asking how I could do this to him. When I went away for a weekend, he called me hundreds of times a day. If I answered, he'd say nothing. His silhouette was always watching me. Somehow, instead of panicking about this, my boyfriend, mom, and even me made jokes about it. None of us really cared too much about it. One day, after 6 months of this, the calls just stopped. I never saw him in his window again. It just ended. But this could have ended so badly for me. And honestly, I wonder what the fuck my mom was thinking about ignoring something so serious. He could have shown up at my door at any time. He knew exactly where I was. Thinking back on it, it was probably the most dangerous situation I've ever been in. I was just thinking about this for some reason, and thought this is the kind of stuff that would fit on this subreddit. Many people might not think it's scary enough, but to me it's definitely a creepy encounter. This happened when I was in secondary school, in the UK. I was probably about 12 or 13. I lived in a pretty safe neighborhood from what I can remember, but the town itself has definitely taken a turn for the worse in the past few years. To get home from school, I would sometimes walk with some of my friends going the same way. We would walk through a big busy park where people would walk their dogs and where children would sit and talk on the swings after school. On this particular day, I was walking home with a friend and her younger brother, who was a year below us, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm not sure exactly how it transpired, but we were approached by a woman who was obviously completely spaced out on some kind of drug. I probably didn't realize this at the time because I was quite naive when I was younger. The woman had probably said something along the lines of asking us for money. But before I knew it, my friend and her brother had started running away, shouting, screaming, and laughing. I quickly followed as I didn't want to be left behind with this random woman. We ran down the street, and after a second or two, we realized that the woman was now chasing us. She was angrily screaming at us. My house was nearby, and being a young stupid kid, I just assumed that it would be the safest bet. Now, if I was ever in that same situation, I don't know whether the best decision would be leading a drugged up person chasing me back to my house, but I was young and scared. I was so lucky in that moment that my stepfather was home. We were banging on the door, screeching and shouting. He came to the door and shouted at the woman to get off his property and that she was clearly on drugs and needed to go away. Throughout the whole experience, my friend and her brother were laughing, thinking that it was all fun and games or something. This was so confusing to me, and as soon as my stepfather got rid of the woman, I broke down in tears and thanked him for helping us. I think I was already interested in true crime and stuff like that at that age, so I saw the situation of what it could have become, and they just thought it was funny that a crazy lady was chasing us. Or maybe it was just like a trauma response, like laughing in uncomfortable situations. I still don't know for sure though. My stepfather wasn't the easiest person to live with, but I'm grateful for him being there to protect us, as who knows what would have happened if there was no one at home. I was hiking in the Olympic National Forest a few years ago, by myself and my 2 dogs. We were 4 days in, around 20 miles at least, as the crow flies, from even a known mountain road. I was camping at 7K feet that night, right where the tree line started to thin out. So when you got to the campsite, there was a big open meadow on the top of the secondary mountain. It was about an hour from sunset. My big dog usually runs around within the proximity of the campsite as I put my tent up and made dinner, etc. But I noticed this time it was a little different. He kept staring up this steep tree-filled mountainside, tail straight up and barking. Not the excited bark, high-pitched barks, but unusual concerned barks. Now, the day before I found a note under a rock at the last landmark saying that there was a big bear problem in the area and that they were harassing a party of campers a few days ago, and I myself had seen big cat tracks the day before. So I was rightfully concerned that this may be more than just the ground squirrels. I decided to climb some of the boulders at the foot of the hill while I took my time looking up the hillsides for movement before I went to go hang up my bear bag up there. They were the only trees around to hang the bag. I didn't hear or see anything, but my dog kept quietly whining like there was something up there. So while concerned, I started hiking up the steep hill to hang the bag. It was so steep, I had to use the trees to balance and lean on, so I didn't come tumbling down before making the 5 or 6 steps to push to the next tree so I could lean against it. Anyway, I'm slowly making my way up this ridge, hopping from one tree to another tree to keep my balance. Then when I get about 100 feet up the hill, I hear a whole lot of movement about 50 feet in front of me. My dog immediately goes from a deep low howl to a savage, slobbering, flying everywhere type of barking now. My heart starts pounding on my chest, and I start to panic. A million thoughts are racing through my head in a matter of seconds, because if it is a bear, my dog is going to try to save me, in which he'll most likely die, and I'm stuck here. I have to get off this hillside fast. I almost 100% am going to trip and fall off this 12 to 15 foot cliff onto the boulders below, so I'm feeling pretty screwed about now. I then hear my other little dog start barking and freaking out down by the campsite, which was just out of sight. I had put her in my tent so that she wouldn't wander off while I was away. So yeah, I was absolutely panicking at this point. A few seconds later, I kind of snap back to it, and I take a few seconds and start to put my survival priorities in order and call my dog back to me, low-key by the way. He comes and sits against my feet and my back is against a tree. I'm kind of pinned and stuck there for a moment, but my dog was seemingly trying to separate me from something up there, so I let him lean against me for a while I try to collect myself. This is when I realized I had completely forgot that I had a headlamp on. I reached up so fast to turn my headlamp on, I basically punched myself in the face. I was having some serious adrenaline dumps going on right then, so much that my knees are starting to shake. I get my headlamp on and peer up the hillside. I figured that I'd at least get reflection off the eyes of whatever was up there, peering, but nothing. I just heard something. We both did. Whatever it was didn't get away or sound like it moved too far. I knew something was there. So I'm kind of just steadfast at this point. I need to know what's up there, because I have to sleep here tonight. You know, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere, alone. Better to face it than wait like a sitting duck all night in my thought process. So yeah, I'm looking up this hill, and at one point, my dog lunges forward, unpinned me. He does a fake bluff charge up the hill, about 15 feet. And I mean, he's snarling and foaming at the mouth at this point. As he does this, I finally see movement, something moving up and breaking the line of the horizon sunset. My dog's bluff made whatever it was blow its cover. I'm zeroed in now. I call my dog back and slightly watch, and what I make out made my heart completely drop. There's a man crouched about 75 feet directly in front of me, not wearing camo clothes, but wearing some raggedy shit with a hood that blended into the environment perfectly. Actually, almost like a makeshift ghillie suit, but with his face exposed. I couldn't see his eyes, and his face was covered in dirt or something, but I knew that we were staring right back at each other that moment. So, I stare for what seems like minutes. No words. I felt like I was trying to subconsciously convey that I was going to stand my ground. I wanted him to know that I saw him, but I guess I was too shaken up to speak. As I'm staring, my little dog back at the campsite started to bark her head off again, like she was scared. And I also had to get off this hill before total dark, or I could get seriously hurt and risk dying trying to get back down. So carefully, I start to head back down the hill with my dog, who doesn't want to leave, but listens. Periodically, I would stop with my back against a tree holding me up and look in the direction again, just to make it even more clear that I saw him. Eventually, I make it down to the boulders at the bottom. By the time I finally jumped down and hit the boulders, my little dog had stopped barking. I could only see the top of my tent from the bottom of the boulders. I thought she was barking just to bark. Dachshunds do that. But when I get there, my little dog had somehow got out of the tent and was walking around the campsite growling, with her tail sticking straight out. I was still trying to hold it together. I thought, okay, maybe she just got her nose between the zipper and worked her way out. But I was positive. I had zipped it so the zipper tab was at the very top of the tent door, out of reach. So in a mixture of being terrified, pissed off, and the feeling of needing to do something, I reached into my day bag and pulled out my .40 caliber. I fired a single shot into the air as the sun was setting, climbed into my tent without eating, and lay there with the gun next to me until first light. As soon as the sun came up, I was packing up my shit and leaving, heading back down the mountain. It sucks. It was all downhill back, but I still couldn't cover the ground to get to my car in one day. It was dark by the time I made up my last camp, about 4 miles from my vehicle, but thankfully there were other people there. We sat around the fire they made, and I felt pretty relieved and safe. They started to tell me that they were planning on heading to where I was the night before, so I tell them my story in detail. Needless to say, we were both walking back to our cars in the morning. Screw all that. The thing that creeps me out to this day is when I got home and started reading reviews of the same place I was hiking on. Other people had similar experiences like mine. A man was even found dead from a fall from the same boulder range 2 years ago, and a woman was found murdered last year. So this happened to me a few years back in the summertime. Our house is located in a suburban area, and to the left of our house the road ends at this small hill, after which there's a small footpath through the forest which I've used since I was a kid to get out of school. The only time I ever come across anyone else on this path was the occasional dog walker, and even that was quite rare. So this one evening, I'm walking my dog down that path, and ahead of me the path curved to the right, so straight ahead there was just vegetation. I'm minding my business, not really paying attention to my surroundings, when I noticed an unusual black shape in the patch of blueberries, perhaps about 15 meters straight ahead of me. Once I focused on what that was, I stopped straight in my tracks, out of confusion. There was what appeared to be a person in full black clothing, sitting in the bushes, facing around 11 o'clock from my position. My dog was quiet and looking straight ahead, and the leash accidentally gave away as my finger released the button locking the leash in place. This caused that audible and loud sound that made me cringe internally, though the figure in the trees gave no indication of having heard anything. There wasn't even any skin visible, as this person had his hood over his head, and I never saw any movement coming from them, despite the fact of the leash that would have been easily audible from that distance. After maybe a minute of staring at the figure, I turned around and quickly walked out of there. I still have no clue who that was exactly, and what they were doing just sitting in full black clothing in a forest in summertime like that. Maybe it was just some depressed kid or something, but it definitely creeped me out in the circumstances, and I've been quite wary of using that path in the dark after that encounter. I was walking my dog by a road. We were just about to enter my neighborhood. My dog is a really sweet dog. She is a 90-pound Great Pyrenees who can really look threatening, but on walks she doesn't bark at anything. On the other side of the road, I saw a lady wearing all black. She was staring at me as I walked by. I looked around for something else that she could be staring at, but no, it was me. As soon as my dog saw the lady, she went off. She started trying to run across the street and attack the lady. The lady didn't even bat an eye. She just kept staring at me and then started to cross the street. At this point, I was freaked out. If my dog wanted to protect me from this woman, then there was something seriously wrong with her. I started running, and surprisingly, she didn't stop to sniff anything. I think she could sense something was bad about that lady, and I could kind of too. Thankfully, I made it home safe, but I still find it scary that she just kept watching me until we were out of her view. Maybe she wasn't dangerous, but my dog thought she was, and I trust her. I went to my friend's house who lives in a rural area where the nearest town is about 13 miles away. There's an abandoned house across from his house. The guy who lived there couldn't pay off his house, so he blew himself up, and the house has been abandoned for 23 years since. We snuck out, and I wanted to take a few photos for my Instagram and Snapchat. We were there for about 20 minutes in the pitch dark. Of course, we had torches. But we started hearing some noises and it got creepy, and both of us got chills at the same time, so we decided to leave. So we go out and hop the fence, and I shine my torch down the dark alley road, and a guy in all black is standing there with what looks like a knife in his hand. So we're looking at him, not wanting to run back to his house because then he would know where we lived. We probably should have, since his dad has automatic rifles, but we both ran down the road anyway, and I looked back and he was running after us. We came upon a yard that construction workers would use to store some of their equipment and vehicles, so we hid there. The guy came in and looked around but didn't find us, and all the while we heard him throwing and kicking stuff while cursing loudly. He left and we stayed there for a while, and then we went home. We couldn't sleep, so we pulled the all-nighter and had 2 airsoft rifles next to us. We figured that if he found us and saw the guns, he wouldn't want to wait to find out if they were real or not. I haven't seen him since. When I was probably 13 years old, my parents went out to a restaurant for dinner and left me home alone for the night. I was hungry and didn't want any of the food in the pantry, so I decided to go to the convenience store to get a bag of chips and a drink. I got on my bike and rode it there, and when I had got to the store, there were some guys by the bike rack that was around the side. With me being on a bike, I approached and started locking it up. There were 3 of them, and they were probably 4 or so years older than me. It looked like they were surveying the area. I heard one say, "There's no cameras here. It's a good spot," and that made me nervous. Were they trying to steal my bike? Jump me perhaps? I had no clue, and I was scared. After I started walking into the store, one confronted me and said, "That's a nice bike you got there." I thanked him and tried to move forward, and he stopped me again. "Mind if I give it a ride?" I told him no and moved on. Sure enough, he walked back to the racks and I heard the chain sound, and I immediately knew he was trying to steal my bike. I went into the store and bought my things and came back out. There was a note on my bike reading, "You're free this time, but next time better not run into us." I thought to myself that these guys were fucking illiterate, and noticed that there was a small fire next to my bike. I then realized that they had poured gasoline all over my bike. I found a hose on the wall outside of the store and sprayed my bike down, and the fire was out. I got on it and raced home. As I was leaving, I looked down and saw a pocket knife on the ground. For the next few days, all I could think was how lucky I was that I didn't get hurt. I worked in law enforcement for over 15 years. Small city, 5 square miles, 45K population that had seen better days and worse days. I was on patrol in the middle of a very quiet night, and I see a kid walking through the redeveloping part of town. Lots of abandoned and condemned buildings, and some active businesses in the century-old buildings being restored. This kid was kind of tall and overweight, but couldn't have been more than 12 years old or so. He was wearing a zippered hoodie, basketball shorts, and just socks on his feet. It's something that tends to pique the interest. So I turn around, catch up to the kid near the corner. He must have been running after I passed him to cover that distance. I step out and walk to talk to him. Another officer calls out that he's been waved down by a woman who was driving around looking for her grandson. I advise that I was probably out with him. The kid tries to ignore me and walk around, but I step into his path and tell him that he's gonna have to stop pretending I'm not here. He says he doesn't know why he has to talk to me, and I say it's because a 10-year-old's walking in a ghost town, and it's 4 a.m., and that's something police are supposed to check up on. He corrects me that he's 11, then he says that he's 16, which he was certainly not. He doesn't even know his birthday, and tells me that his name is LeBron James. He said that he was on his way to play video games at a friend's house, and when I asked what the friend's name is, he just tells me that he lives over there and nods in a vague direction. Note, if ever when interacting with cops and your answer is to a question we didn't ask, we take notice of that. Anyway, the grandma and the little brother pull up. She tells me his real name. He tries to tell us that he doesn't know her and asks if we could walk him to his dad's house, but won't tell us where it is. The grandma gets out of the car, brings him his shoes, and says that his dad shouldn't have to deal with this shit at 4 a.m. Neither should she, and neither should the police. The kid puts his shoes on, and after getting everyone's information, it turns out the story was that he was playing video games all night and keeping his brother up, got yelled at for it, and figured that he wasn't going to live there if he couldn't play Madden at all hours. Juvenile was returned to the Guardian. 2-paragraph report. No muss, no fuss. Creepy part? The other officer and I stand around on the corner BSing for a minute or two before clearing the call when we hear the faintest noise. One of our local homeless had stepped out from a recessed doorway about 20 feet from our interaction with the runaway. He was there the whole time and almost escaped everyone's notice even when walking away. Eli, we'll call him, was mentally ill and resisted to all attempts to treat him. 1,000-yard stare. He split his nights between couch surfing with relatives or on the streets. Frequent calls for him have involved masturbating in public, urinating, defecating in public, staring and following people, standing in traffic, attacking store employees and the police when confronted for shoplifting. Eli says one word per week on average. That night, he looked right at us and said, "Hello guys, it's a really nice night out tonight." Eli doesn't have a history of messing with kids specifically, but if we hadn't stopped that chubby kid, he would have turned down that side street right into Eli's path. Guy that's erratic, playing Phantom of the Ghetto, and doing an amazing job of it. Rare that 2 veteran cops get the cold water, but we did that night. Edit. Just checking up on it. Eli actually has incidents involving kids since then, including following young girls for blocks. This story happened in my early teenage years. I had a friend group of models, and they asked me to go watch their show at a nightclub and just be supportive. If you are asking yourself how I managed to get into a nightclub at such a young age, the answer is very easily. I live in the Balkans, and getting into clubs is extremely easy. I had one friend that was very sketchy, and she invited a friend that was even worse to come to the club with us. My parents were always very trusting and have never once called me to get home or give me a curfew because I had never given them reasons not to trust me. We get to the club and right away, the friend of my friend said that she has no money, but not to worry because she would get free drinks for the 3 of us. I refuse as I already had money and already ordered a drink for myself. Not even 15 minutes pass of us being there and I get a call from my dad asking me when I was coming home. I say I just got there and that the party barely started. What follows next is something I never expected. My dad yells at me to get home in the next 15 minutes or that he would have to drag me home himself. It was so weird, but as a young teen, the last thing you want is your dad picking you up from a party and everyone seeing him yell at you. So I hopped on a taxi and went home right away. Pretty good, right? The next day, I found out that both of my friends were forcefully taken from that club because they needed to pay back the money they took. The money for the drinks the girl mentioned. I'm not sure what happened to them, but that night they both said they didn't want to talk about it. The only thing I know is the girl asked for money from some guys and then went off the radar and wasn't seen for months. I have seen her since, but we no longer speak. So there you go, an almost creepy encounter, but not quite. To add, my dad didn't have a reason for me to come home. I think he was just in a bad mood or something. This was about 20 years ago. Me and a bunch of my friends went to a popular campground by the beach to spend the night, rural coastal area. When we arrived, there was a pile of chopped wood about 2 meters high. It was a bit of a bizarre novelty, so we had fun climbing on it and building our fire out of something that wasn't twigs. There's even a candid picture of my friends up there. So we went to set up our tents, lit a fire with ease, smoked weed, and drank, as you do in your early 20s. We went home the next day. It may have been a few days later, or maybe a week, I can't remember, but the police discovered a body of a missing young woman under the woodpile. The murderer had killed her, chopped up all the wood, driven about an hour, dumped her body, and then dumped the wood on top of her. Turned out that she had been there for about 24 hours by the time we were climbing and playing on the woodpile. I can't remember her name now, which makes me feel bad, and Google doesn't help. Her murderer was brought to justice at least. Anyways, I think about it from time to time, even though it's been a while. I was camping in the dead of winter in the Northeast with my scout troop. It was only about 20 degrees out at night. I usually wake up a few times over the night on these abnormally cold ones, but this time I woke up sweating, which was unusual. And when I sat up, I heard something rustling not too far away from my tent. Me, being one of the oldest, got out of my tent to investigate. I had a knife, a hatchet, and a flashlight. I heard something crash, but didn't see anyone. I checked the 5 tents around me, and everybody was asleep. I checked the 15 little scout tents, and everyone was there. I checked the adult tents, and everyone was there too. It freaked me out so much that I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, when I left my tent, I checked the snow around my area, and there were footprints of boots bigger than mine, all around my tent, and around the shrubs near it. There was also a huge spot in the snow where you could tell that someone dove down and hid behind the shrubs. Needless to say, there was someone that I didn't know who had bigger feet than I and all the scouts and leaders, and it was in our campsite. I always set alarms for 1 hour now. I do campsite sweeps from now on. Edit. When I checked the tents, it took me about 5 minutes, and there was snow and sticks everywhere, so there's no way anybody could have got into their tent without me seeing. I was out with my girlfriend Sunday evening for a walk in the park. I suggested we try a new way. The entrance of the park was a narrow trail with tall grass on both sides leading deeper into the woods. After a few minutes walking, we noticed a tall man wearing a white tank top and shorts standing alone on the trail looking at us. I whispered to my girlfriend, "That's not creepy at all," and proceeded to take a different path in the forks ahead of us. We continued down the trail that ended up taking us down in this narrower path with trees on both sides. As we were walking in a single file line, girlfriend leading the way, I heard something like a branch snap behind us, which made me stop and listen. I shortly concluded that it was just an animal or a coincidence. It was starting to get nearly pitch black, so we had turned on our flashlights on our phones and decided to head back before it got too dark. I was walking in front now, and it just took a few steps before I was face to face with the guy with the white tank top. He was sneaking behind us with no lights on, following us in the dark. I shined my lights towards him, and he looked like a deer in headlights, like someone had caught him red-handed. My fist was instinctively clenched, and I had a real bad feeling about him. I was sure it was going to go south, and I was ready to fight. As we approached to go past him, he said, "Good evening." I replied with a confident good evening to show him no fear, and we continued our way back. I looked back after a few steps, and he was just standing there at the spot that we crossed him, and he was looking in our direction. I told my girlfriend to get in front, and we ran the fuck back to the exit and got in our car. Relieved, we were talking about what just happened and realized the intensity of it. A few minutes later, we see the man walk out of the trails fast. I don't know what he was hiding there or what was at the end of the trail, but I'm lucky we turned back fast. We both felt bad vibes from him, and I believe he was up to no good. Stranger in the woods, let's not meet again. So I want to share this creepy encounter with you guys. About 4 years ago, my wife and I planned an evening out for her birthday. My parents babysat and we went out to a restaurant. Because I drove, I didn't drink, so we didn't bother to go anywhere else after we were done in the restaurant. But because the night was still young, we decided to take a long drive. A location which is relatively nearby is a large national park. We decided to take a drive up there and sit and chat under the stars. When we arrived there, the country roads were dead. I found a nice open parking area to pull the car up in. We started making out and things carried on until we began having sex. At no point did either of us leave the car. As we were doing the deed, headlights lit up our vehicle. Instantly we were like, "Oh God, there's somebody driving by. I hope they don't see what we're doing." For me, it was an instant turn off, so I quickly pulled up my trousers and ceased. I thought the car was just a fellow traveler passing by, but to our surprise, the car pulled into our area and began circling us. I put the keys in the ignition and said, "Let's go." I drove out of the car parking area onto the road back to the main connected road. The car followed. Once we were on the main connecting road, we could see the make, model, and color of the car that was now following us. It was a dark red Ford. I drove quickly but not recklessly. The car matched my speed and was right up my ass. Neither of us were 100% sure if we were just being paranoid or if this car was really meaning to follow us. So I said, "I know what I'll do. I'll pull off at some random turning to see what they'll do." So I put my foot down, and after a few hundred yards down the main road, I made a late left turn down a narrow side lane. I pulled up after a while on the side road, stopped and turned off my headlights, and watched in the rearview mirror to see if the red Ford carried on straight on the main road or if it turned off. After a few seconds, there he was. He had turned off and is now coming down the narrow lane towards us again. At first we were blinded by the headlights, but I was sure it was him. My wife said, "I don't think it is the same car, you know?" I said, it is, look." As he got closer, it became apparent that it was the same car, so I drove further and further, and luckily found a big space enough to turn my car around. I spun around and back on the main road again. He followed. Now back on the main road for the second time, I now decided to speed. As I was heading towards the built-up city center, he kept behind me the whole way. Eventually, we stopped at a red light, and he was right behind. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw his face. To this day, I can still remember his face. A middle-aged, slightly tubby man with glasses and thin gray hair. At this point, I was freaked out. We both were. I said to my wife, "I'm gonna keep driving and try to lose him, but I'm not driving home, so he doesn't know where we live." She agreed. We drove around for maybe another 10 minutes. He was still following. At this point, I was beginning to consider the possibility of calling the cops, but I thought I would give it a few more minutes of trying to lose him. Thankfully, a few streets later, he turned off and was never seen again. I know it's a real possibility that he may have been a dogger. Not sure if this is a thing in America, but it's basically where strangers meet other strangers in the wilderness to have sex. But if he was a dogger, or thought we were doggers, then surely he would have understood that we weren't interested when we actively drove away. The fact that he followed us into a built-up city for 25 minutes or more makes me think that he had more sinister intentions. What do you think? To this day, it's still the wildest moment of my life. This story happened a few years ago when I worked in the electronics department at a small town Walmart. The store has a photo center with self-service kiosks in the electronics department, so I was usually the one manning it. This town had a large retirement community, and a lot of bored seniors would come in to use the kiosk for hours at a time, printing pictures. This was a pretty good gig. I was good at helping the customers figure out this newfangled tech, and they loved showing me all their pictures. They were mostly adorable and helped my shift go by. Then he showed up. An old man, looked to be in his 70s or 80s, with a thick European accent. He looked very sweet and unassuming. He asked for help at the kiosk, and I obliged. Delighted, he asked me to look at some pictures he took of his wife. Trigger warning, it gets graphic. I will never forget what I saw. As I plunged into his hard drive, he was talking about how he just moved here after his wife passed. Terrible accident. She had apparently fallen and never recovered. Then the photos loaded. A woman on the sidewalk. There was blood. Her arm stuck out at an odd angle. She looked broken. The man, still smiling by the way, explained how he had taken this right after her fall. He clicked the arrow keys. There were many shots from different angles. The horror show kept going. I was completely speechless. What do I even say to that? There was another series of the same woman in a hospital bed, hooked up to all kinds of tubes, clearly dying. It was sickening, but the worst ones were the ones where she was dead. I mean dead, eyes open and rolling back, mouth gaping dead. Then the old man standing next to her corpse, smiling, the same creepy smile he wore as he completed the gruesome tale. I don't know what happened to him after that. I muttered some excuse and ran to the bathroom. I threw up and then went home. Every time I saw him in the store, I power walked the other way. I did speak to my manager about it, but I feel like they never took it seriously. They said that he was just a harmless man with a photography bug. I still see that dead woman when I close my eyes sometimes. So this just happened last night, and I'm really freaking out about it. For some context, I'm a 25-year-old female living in a less than desirable part of my town. There has been a huge problem with the overabundance of homeless people in my area. The homeless part isn't the main concern. It's that most are on drugs, which has led to a major increase in break-ins, and going out in the dark, even just to the car, is a tad bit hair-raising. Anyways, I live on the 3rd floor of a 3-story apartment. The layout of my apartment is pretty basic. Kitchen and bathroom to the left and right as you enter. If you continue down the straight hallway from the entry, you'll hit the living room and the dining room that has a huge bay window with a bedroom to the right. So last night, I had just got done with the dishes and was preoccupied in the kitchen. I kept hearing what I can only describe as a scratching tapping sound. It was pretty faint, and at the time I paid very little attention to it. A little after I started hearing the sounds, I went into my bedroom, and through the window I could have sworn I saw movement, but when I took a closer look, nothing was there. Now, I live on the 3rd floor, but below my window is the top of the extended portion of the shared laundry room. It was a good 10 to 12 feet below the bottom of my window. At this point, I thought I was just tripping after a long day. I changed and got something comfy on and headed into the living room to watch a few episodes of Lucifer and text a few friends. The whole time when I was on the couch, I would hear the same faint sounds, but every time I would pause the TV, I would no longer hear it. At this point, I don't know if I'm nuts or I should actually be wary of this. I kind of brushed it off, but listened closely. I unpaused the TV, but was not focused on the devil himself. I was just listening and looking out the corner of my eye. That's when I saw it, a hand at the corner of my bay window. It's important to note that there's an 8-inch ledge just below my window. I believe the purpose of the ledge is for drainage. Well, anyway, there was someone on that ledge just below my window. I tried to act as if I hadn't seen anything, and then sent a text to the guy that lived 2 apartments over, just hoping that he was home. I casually walked into the kitchen and decided to call him. Luckily, he picked up right away. "Hey, what's up?" "There's a person outside my window, and I think they're gonna bust in." He then said something that made my heart drop. He wasn't home. At that point, I didn't know what to do. I was still in the kitchen, but was acting like I was cleaning up and turned off the kitchen light. I just stood there in complete darkness. I was doing my best to play it off as if I was clueless, and I think I was doing a good job. I was acting as if I was texting, but I had my eye trained on the window. That's when it all came together. I saw the hand move out of the corner of the window with what looked like a phone, and then I heard the sound. It was a slight tap of the phone against the window. He was recording me through my window. I don't know why I did what I did next, or if I was even thinking, but I ran straight towards the window and pounded on it. The hand moved quickly, and then I covered my windows with my blinds. It's kind of an anticlimactic ending. I ended up calling the cops, but I doubt anything will come of it. Earlier today, my neighbor gave me sticks to put in my windows, and I think I'm gonna have my blinds closed at night from now on. I don't know how long this person was out there, and I honestly don't want to know. I just feel so unsafe sitting in my apartment tonight. My friend lived in a super rural, small country town, and I had came to spend the summer at her grandparents' house. We were both 13 at the time. We are now 22, and thought it would be a good idea to sneak out around the town, maybe stop at the park. As we were walking down this road, about 30 minutes after we left the house, we noticed someone was following us, wearing all black with a hoodie. We both got pretty creeped out and quickly rounded the corner before hiding in some dark bushes. After the guy passed us, we waited for another 30 minutes. We decided that we should probably head back to the house, so we ran there. Once we got back inside, we really couldn't get to sleep, so we did an all-nighter. The next morning, we saw on the news that a woman was stabbed, assaulted, and killed on that same exact road that we had been on that night. We can't help but wonder if that attacker was the man who had been following us. Safe to say, we didn't sneak out again after that. Extra details. We believe the man was following us because of multiple factors. 1. It was 3 a.m. and he was the only other person we saw in the area. Super rare to see anyone else that late in a small town. 2. He was wearing full black, joggers and a hoodie with the hood up. It was pretty warm out since it was summer, so it just seemed odd. 3. Every time we would stop and look back at him, he would act like he was looking at something, and then when we would start walking again, he would do the same. It just seemed suspicious, and we both got a bad feeling, so we hid. Also, we did not tell the police because we were scared. We also didn't have much information to give them, other than the fact that it was a male and he was wearing all black. We didn't think that would be any help. If I was an adult at the time, I for sure would have reported something, but I was just a child. So this story is from around 10 years ago. I was 16 or 17 at the time. I recently discovered this subreddit, and it instantly brought these memories flooding back to me. At the time, I kind of just brushed it off, because nothing bad ended up happening, and I put it down as, I guess this shit just happens to you when you're a woman walking alone at night, but looking back now, I realize how creepy it was. I was coming home on a Thursday night after being at a pub with some friends. We had been out a little more centrally in the city, so I had to take the bus on my own to get home to my residential neighborhood. I had done this route hundreds of times, so I didn't see it as being particularly dangerous, especially since I live in a fairly nice neighborhood. It was only about 11 p.m., but because I lived in a residential area and it was in the middle of the working week, when I got off the bus at my stop, it was absolutely dead and there was no one around. Again, this didn't spook me, as it's only about a 5 to 10 minute walk from the bus stop to my house. As I turned down a long residential street that leads towards my house, I noticed a guy walking further down the street. This puts me a little on edge, but I was reassured by the fact that he had his back towards me and was walking away from me down the street. As I kept walking down the street, I noticed the guy turn around and clock me. That's fine, I thought. I always turn around when I hear someone walking behind me at night, so nothing weird about that. But I noticed as we get further and further down the street, kept checking if I was still walking in the same direction as him. At this point, I'm starting to get pretty freaked out, as I'm painfully aware that we are the only two people around. Just as I was weighing up what I should do, he turned down the path of one of the houses to the right, and I let out a sigh of relief. He was going into his house. I was just being paranoid the whole time. The houses in my area are terraced, with the front doors kind of being embedded into the enclave at the front of the house. What this means is that from where I was standing, about 50 feet away, I couldn't actually see the front door of the house as it was obscured by the wall. However, I saw him walk down the path and disappear into the front enclave, so my logical conclusion was that he was letting himself into the house. I can't describe exactly what made me feel like this, but after that initial feeling of relief wore off, I suddenly got this really bad feeling. So I stopped walking and just stood there. There's a teeny voice in my head that said, "What if he was just faking you out?" The feeling became so strong that I stepped off the pavement and ducked behind a parked car and just waited. After a couple of minutes of just crouching behind the car, staring at the house, I saw movement and my heart stopped. The man came back down the path, out into the street, and was looking around, looking for me. He must have been waiting for me in the doorway, knowing that if I kept walking, I wouldn't see him until it was too late. Unfortunately for him, his hiding place also meant that he couldn't see me. So when I didn't walk past as he anticipated, he came back out into the street to try to work out where I was. Looking back now, I probably should have called the police at this point. But as a scared teenager, my fight or flight brain took over, and I sprinted down one of the roads running perpendicular to the street where we were on, as I knew I could use it and take a slightly longer route home. I didn't stop running until I got home, where I quickly double locked the door behind me. Amazingly, I didn't even think to wake up my family. I literally just went to bed and then woke up the next morning and went to school. I dread to think of what would have happened if I hadn't got that bad feeling and stopped walking. Part of me thinks that on some sort of subconscious level, my brain had registered of not hearing the front door shut after the man had approached it, and therefore triggered an alarm in my head, but I had no perception of it at the time. Lesson learned: trust your gut. So this weekend, my girlfriend and I went to a museum. As we were walking from the parking garage to the museum, this random dude starts walking out on his phone. He quickly got off his phone and walked behind me and tried to look casual as he turned around and took a picture. We looked around and saw that no one was on the street besides us. The only other people were a family of 4 and 2 small kids. I thought maybe he was trying to take a picture of them and was even more suspicious of that. After he did his little spin move photography, he went to sit down on a bench and watched us walk in. Now my girl was freaking out about it, and I was thinking nothing of it. Maybe he was just a weirdo. If anything, maybe it was pictures of the kids, or maybe some creepy weird pictures of her because she was in a cute dress. But now, 3 days later, I'm at work, and I'm a cashier at a store. I was standing at the front of my line looking for customers ready to pay, and I see a man walking by me. He's holding his camera almost directly pointed at me at an awkward angle. I'm thinking, no way he's taking a picture of me. But as he passes me, I get a look at his phone and could tell that he was using his camera. I've been trying to rationalize and rack my brain that maybe he was taking photos of something else in the store. But the angle he came from doesn't really have anything interesting or any barcodes he would need a picture of. Why could this be happening, and why to me? Did I do something that would warrant someone taking pictures of me? If they had pictures of me, what would they even do with them? I'm just nervous and don't know who to tell and how to feel about this. Is it all in my head? This just happened today. I'm a mom of 2 and am currently taking online classes. My husband works nights, so any errands I need to run during the day, my boys come with me. Today's errands included me running to my school's library for some books. My school has multiple locations, and the closest one to me, unfortunately, is located in the sketchiest area. I figured it would be fine, since it's a college campus. I pull up, load my boys into the stroller, and headed inside. As soon as I went in, I noticed the first floor was mostly a resource type of area, and didn't see an elevator to the other floors, and going up the stairs with a stroller is a nearly impossible task. I didn't want to give up, so I started strolling to see if there's anything I could use. I immediately noticed a woman at the information desk looking around, if not right at me. It weirded me out a bit because there were maybe a total of 3 other people aside from the very few workers. This woman appeared to be in her late 30s, while I was in my mid-20s with 2 young children. I browsed the aisle, and then this woman moves to an information desk that was closer to me. I decided to ask for help, so I make my way to the same desk to wait my turn. This woman turns and just stares at me for a good solid 5 seconds. I was waiting for a smile or awkward small talk, but that never came. Her phone camera was also being pointed at me, so I started browsing again because I was uncomfortable. She kept looking at me and her phone was following me. I went to hide behind some bookshelves for a bit and then made my way to the middle of the library. The woman's finished at her desk, turns right towards me with her phone pointed at me, and is walking straight towards me, staring daggers. I'm extremely freaked out and confused. She walked right by and made her way to an elevator, which was nowhere near me. I'm not confrontational at all, which I know I need to work on, but I built up the courage to talk to the same librarian she had. I told him that I thought she was staring at me, maybe recording me, and that it made me feel uncomfortable. They told me that they couldn't see because the monitor was so big, but also, she was just looking up stuff on her phone, totally brushing it off. I ended up leaving and constantly checking over my shoulder. I know this isn't super terrifying, but for someone with anxiety, it was pretty scary. Also having my 2 young kids with me. I would love to hear if anyone has ideas of what was going on. I heard her asking for some religious book. Also, this town itself is known for drugs. I can't imagine someone actively seeking a young mom or kids would be at a college campus library on a Wednesday morning. My name is Caitlin. I'm a 27-year-old female and no stranger to being hit on or stared at by men, but that's usually as far as it goes, until one night. I was staying with my older sister and we were up late doing some arts and crafts. At around midnight, we decided to go to a nearby gas station for something to drink and cigarettes. On the way to the store, I noticed that we needed some gas, so I figured since we were going to the gas station, I might as well fill up. As I get to the gas station, I pulled up to the pump furthest from the store, which I now realize was a mistake. I walk up to the store and notice there was a man sitting on the sidewalk right in front of the store. I didn't make eye contact or speak, I just walked inside and got my stuff. After paying, I walked out and I immediately noticed the man that was sitting before was now standing and staring directly at me. This wasn't just any stare, it was a stare of intent, and it made me nervous. I pretended I didn't notice and started off towards my car, where my sister was waiting. As I walked past the man, I noticed that he immediately got behind me and started following closely. I didn't want him to know that I noticed, as it made me feel like I had the element of surprise on him, as opposed to him having it on me. I continued to watch him out of my peripheral vision, and from what I could see, his face and eyes were fixated on me, with the kind of malice that made me shudder, and still does. I don't know what he had planned for me, but I knew it wasn't good. I reached the car and shot my sister the help me eyes. Thankfully, she had been watching the whole time, and was ferociously staring behind me at the man. He noticed us too, and with another stroke of luck, someone just happened to pull into the gas pump behind me. The man that was following me with unwavering intent a few seconds earlier suddenly shuffled awkwardly to the side and then turned and walked off, looking down the whole time. I've never felt so threatened in my life. I felt like I was prey being stalked by a predator. This is such a crazy, scary world we live in these days. Always be aware of your surroundings and be careful. You never know who's watching and what they may have planned for you. So one day, I was driving to pick up a friend that lives in a crappy part of town. We were both gonna go see a movie. I really haven't even got to dating yet after my fiance passed away. It'll be 4 years in October. Anyways, I had gotten changed and I looked pretty decent. I usually do. I never go out looking like I just rolled out of bed. There was this red truck in front of me, and at the time I was driving a 2014 Hyundai Sonata Limited Edition. It's a good car. While I was driving, this truck was in front of me for a long time. I didn't tailgate him, and I stayed far enough back when we were at lights and stoplights. I started feeling like someone was staring at me, and I looked in my mirrors trying to psych myself into thinking that I was just overthinking. I should have listened to that little voice again, but I didn't this time, and I was a fool not to listen. Anyway, I finally look up in front of me, and I notice the guy in the truck in front of me is staring at me through his rearview mirror. His driver's side window is down, and I noticed he stuck his hand out his window and adjusted his side mirror so that he could stare at me. The whole time I'm talking to myself, saying, so what, he's just staring, it's no big deal. But something gave me the creeps big time. He and I are the only ones on the roads, as we're in the middle of nowhere, and I stay pretty far behind him. The first time we come up to an entrance of a development, right before we get to the houses, there's this pull off with pavement, and he immediately pulled off without any kind of warning, no turning signals, nothing, but he was a little ahead, and he just stopped his car and sat there, and I slowed down, thinking that he might pull back out, but then I ended up just passing him. Well, as soon as I did, he floored it and got behind me. I've never seen anyone tailgate that close, to the point that you couldn't even slide your hand between the space. My legs were shaking so bad, I called my friend, and he says not to bring this person to his house, which I thought was a dick move. The guy didn't beep, he didn't say anything, he didn't even do anything, but ride my ass and look at me. This went on for 10 minutes, and I swear to you, I thought I was gonna have a heart attack. My adrenaline was going through the roof, and my hands were sweating. I was taking curves 15 miles over the speed limit, and he kept up with me the whole time. Finally, this truck pulls up behind him. It was either one of those trucks that they use to cut down trees, or the ones that they use on power lines. The minute he did, the guy put his turning signal on and made a left. In an instant, he was gone. I don't know what would have happened if that truck hadn't pulled behind us. It literally made me sick. It might not sound so scary, but trust me, there was something very wrong with this person. Back when I was 19 years old, I worked at Victoria's Secret. It was kind of messed up because my friend and I both applied, and she was a beautiful girl, but her tooth was messed up in the front of her mouth, so they basically hired me and not her. I had all kinds of creepy stuff happen, like male customers would come in and say, "Hey, my wife is your size in underwear. What size do you wear?" Or, "What size bra are you? My wife is a similar size, and I want to buy her one." At first, I was mortified, and then it turned to, that's the lamest thing I've ever heard in my life. You're not getting my size. Anyways, I started noticing this gentleman come in every single day. Sometimes they would put me outside with a little stand, and it would have perfume on it, and I would try to get people walking by to try it out and buy it. Yes, I was one of those annoying people at the mall trying to get you to smell perfumes, to get you to come into the store. So this gentleman was in his late 30s and never really said anything to me. I felt deep down inside that something was off, but he never approached me, so I brushed it off as me being paranoid. I drove a 1985 Mustang, and when I would go outside in the parking lot, there would be a rose under my windshield wiper, and a note on a piece of paper saying how pretty I was. I was in a pretty bad relationship, so I wasn't telling my loser ex that I was having some issues with someone that I didn't even know. Then one day, another piece of paper was under my windshield wiper. It had a name and a phone number. I grabbed it, and when I looked up, parked directly across from me was the guy in his BMW just staring. He had these god-awful dead eyes that I could only describe as staring into black holes. He scared the shit out of me. When I went to go leave, he pulled out behind me. I tried to talk myself out of it, like I did many times in my life, and not listen to the little voice in my head. That voice had definitely helped me out over the years, and when I don't listen to it, it usually ended bad. He was tailgating me and was pretty close. He even blew through a red light, though I tried to wait until the last second. And I was also running out of gas. I took this gigantic phone that was in the car. This took place in 2001, so phones were a lot bigger. But anyways, I called my dad. As the phone was ringing that very moment, we were on the highway towards my house. He pulled up next to me on the left, keeping the same exact speed. I look over at him and he was doing obscene things with his mouth that I'm assuming he wanted to do to me. Finally, my dad answered the phone. I've always lived in the middle of nowhere all my life, and I love the peace and quiet, but that was the problem but instead my dad talked me through something else. He told me to get off the next exit, which took me to a slightly busier town. He told me to take a right on the first street I got on. He asked me if he was still right behind me, and to make sure he told me to take a few lefts, and after that, if he was still behind me, not to lead him to the house because it was too dangerous. I wasn't really familiar with this town and I had no idea where the police station was, so I took a few lefts and rights. Finally, I figure out where the police station is, and as I pull up, he stopped and rolled down his window. When I got out of the car, he said, "When are you gonna call me? I showed you what I wanted." I picked up the phone that I had in my hand and I was so angry and scared. I was shaking and I threw it at him and managed to hit his car. He took off and the phone broke and I got in trouble, but once I explained everything, I wasn't charged with anything. This taught me to always pay attention and never run on fumes in my car again, because it could have been much worse. So about 6 years ago, I started working at a gas station. After my fiance died, I kept the job for a while. A police officer would often come by at night. He was really nice and used to sit in the parking lot because I had to close up sometimes by myself, and they would just sit there and make sure I was okay and wait for me to lock up. But there was this one cop that always came in to get his Copenhagen wintergreen pouches. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's for people that used to like chewing tobacco. Basically a pouch you put in the side of your mouth. Anyways, when he would come in, he was friendly, but flirted a lot. A little bit later I found out he was married, and I stopped talking to him. He made no kind of effort to hide the fact that he was looking at my butt a lot. He would always say things that were a bit over the line of flirting, but he never really pushed it too far. My brother is a police officer, but not for the same precinct or county. But this police officer kind of used it as a reason to talk to me. My dad was also an elected official for this county that my brother worked in. When I told my friend about what the police officer said to me, he said that I should report it. There were a couple times when I went into a few stores to help fill in when they had people call out and they really needed help. He would come in the next day and say, "When I drove by, I didn't see your car. Where were you?" Like how a boyfriend would ask you if you came home late. But here's the thing, even I know this about police. If I went to the precinct, which was right down the street from where I worked, and said this guy was harassing me, they're gonna think I'm an idiot and not believe me, and I was just gonna make more enemies. If I told my brother, he would have probably lost his job because he would have done something. I just didn't want my brother to get blackballed. So when I was offered a job somewhere else, I jumped at the chance. It was not a great job, but I needed to get away. I worked there for too long. Everyone knew everything about me, since it was a small town with really only one stoplight. Well, fast forward about 4 or 5 months later. While I was driving like an idiot and I had my phone up because I couldn't really see it, and it was attached to my radio and I was trying to change it, and something happened to it. So I pass the light and I hear a siren and see the flashing lights. I pull over. I'm getting out my registration, license, and my insurance, and then I roll down my window. It was the police officer from my previous job. He looked surprised and said that he didn't know it was me. I don't know if I believed him or not. He asked me how I was doing and said that he noticed my vehicle was not at the gas station anymore, and why I didn't tell him that I was leaving. He then said that since I was such a sweet, pretty girl, that he would only be giving me a warning. He asked me if that was the right address. I had just moved with my kids into a house that we still live in, but I hadn't changed my address on the license yet. But I had to give him the right address. He then said, "Are you sure this is the right one?" I said yeah, and he walked back to his cruiser. A few minutes later he came back and gave me a warning, and he said maybe he'll see me sometime soon. Well, he was not lying about that. About 2 months go by and my car is sitting in my driveway in the front of the house that can fit 2 vehicles. The driveway was huge and went into the back of our 4-bedroom house. It was a 1920s rehab, which was beautiful and I loved it. It was the middle of the afternoon, and I only noticed this because my TV points towards the street, which meant my back was towards the window, which looked out to the street. I noticed a light go across the wall of my living room. For some reason, it made me feel like someone was out there. When I look up, there's a sheriff's SUV sitting next to my car. So immediately, the first thing I thought was something happened to my brother. It was the worst feeling, trying to get to the door to figure out what was going on, because I really couldn't see inside the vehicle until I got closer, and it was that cop. I was flabbergasted, and that doesn't happen a lot. He told me that he came out to check on me to see how I was doing, how my dating life was, and if I was talking to anybody. Also, if anyone else lived there, and what kind of house it was. The whole time I'm wondering what the hell is he doing there, just standing there talking to me, shooting in the breeze for a half hour. What could he have told them was the reason for him sitting outside my house? My neighbors were outside, so it was kind of awkward. My son was in the house, and I was shaking. I shake when I get upset or when I'm scared, and I actually started shivering, and I think he could tell I was nervous, so he came over and gave me a hug. He then said, "Is there any way we can go to the park and ride, and then you can play with my," I'll just use the word penis. He said that he wanted me so bad, whispering in my ear when he hugged me. I shook my head no, and he got angry, real angry. I could see it in his face. I was like, I have to go back inside. By then, I was ready to pass out. He was so brazen, to say the least. He said, "Since you don't have a boyfriend, maybe I can stop by your work sometime." Probably 2 weeks later, I got a job working nights, and I was working 60 hours a week. At least he hasn't been back since I sleep during the day. There's not a day that goes by that I don't look outside when I think someone's out there, and it still makes me jumpy. When you use your power of the badge to do wrong, you make the good cops look bad by abusing your power. He has done so much and said so much that I can't say here, and it's literally sexual harassment. In the beginning, I told my manager at the gas station what was happening, and she said that he was a regular customer, and that unless he touched me or did something like that, she couldn't do anything about it. Anyways, it's been a while since I've seen him, and hopefully we won't cross paths again. They say that 99% of the internet is not accessible to traditional browsers. The world that lives beneath that, which we see when we visit the dark web, contains things which defy normal understanding. It has become the breeding ground to all of man's most perverse and dark fantasies. It's a place where chaos reigns supreme. My mother's not an extremely savvy internet user. In fact, most of the time she has little to no idea of what she's doing on there. If she's on someone else's YouTube account or Google, she often does what she's trying to do without paying attention to whose credentials she is using. Can you blame her though? Her generation didn't grow up with computers. They are severely disadvantaged when it comes to that kind of stuff. I, on the other hand, somewhat pride myself on being knowledgeable about computers and the internet. I don't know how I would have lived life without the opportunities it affords me. One could easily assume then that I would be someone who would take interest in the dark web, and believe me, it's not for the faint of heart. Now the thing is, I am very careful with what I do. I use a great VPN service, and I know what I can and can't click on in order not to expose my IP address to anyone. After years of doing this though, I did however become a bit too careless, and it just happens at the time that I did, I was on my mom's computer. I was hanging with my family during the holidays, and I got into an argument with my little brother, Tommy, about a certain listing I had seen on the dark net, market search. He's always been a bit of a sheltered kid, considering that he has a cleft lip and my parents baby him like a toddler. So I figured that it was my responsibility to show him some of the real world every once in a while. I had told him about this listing for a clown that you can hire for your birthday parties that was for some reason advertised on the dark web, and of course he didn't believe me, so I showed him the listing. We read about how the clown would provide your party with an exceptional experience, one that you would likely never forget. Considering my knowledge of the dark web, I was pretty sure it was not an experience that you would want to remember. After I showed him, I got distracted and went about my business doing other things. Somehow though, I left my browser window open on my mom's computer. This was hands down the worst, most careless slip up of my life, one that I'll likely never live down. After I was done on there, she used that laptop and, thinking that the clown was something that my little brother wanted for his birthday party, she went ahead and paid for him to come visit the house. After I found out what she had done, we tried to cancel it, but I guess it didn't work because that weekend, a clown car pulled up in front of my house for Tommy's birthday. Out of the car stepped an old man in traditional clown makeup with these pale bluish white eyes like those of a blind person, yet he seemed to be able to walk up the driveway totally fine. My mom was very freaked out and had my dad go meet him in the driveway. When my dad approached him, he tried to shake his hand, but instead, the clown just immediately pulled out 3 juggling balls and started tossing them up effortlessly. My dad stared at him for a moment in awe, then began to guide him around the side of the yard into the back, where the rest of the party guests were. I was definitely a bit worried, so I went in the backyard, and the clown was already setting up for the magic show. This guy looked freaky as hell, but everyone in the crowd seemed okay with it, so I suppose I was just being too judgmental and should just let him do his show. Plus, he had a name tag on that said Noisy, and considering he hadn't said a word the whole time, I thought that was pretty funny. For the first trick, he took a quarter out and he pretended to make it disappear in his hand. Then he reached around the back of his head and pulled the quarter out from behind his ear. It was a pretty basic trick, but then he kept going with it. He pulled out quarter after quarter from behind his ear, until there was a pile of change at least a few inches high off the ground beside him. Everyone in the yard seemed impressed when they saw this. It was really an incredible trick. Then he picked up the pile of change off the ground and put it in his shirt. He then held his shirt up with his 2 fingers and launched the coins up in the air, only nothing flew out. The change had totally disappeared, and in its place a bunny rabbit popped out. The crowd really got into this. A few of them even got up and started putting money into his tip jar. Noisy then extended out his hand and pointed to Tommy. Tommy smiled, excited to have been acknowledged, and stepped up. Noisy then pulled out one of those huge bubble making wands and had Tommy stand in this round tray of soap on the ground. Noisy then lowered the wand over Tommy and lifted it back up quickly, covering him in a gigantic bubble. This was not an ordinary bubble though. It would not pop no matter what. Tommy would hit the side of it and it wouldn't break. Everyone in the audience stared at this speechless. Clearly they were watching something that wasn't possible occurring before their eyes. After a few seconds of being trapped inside the bubble, Tommy started to freak out and thrash against the side of the bubble. He began screaming and crying, panicking. "Hey, let him out," my dad yelled as he started approaching the clown. Noisy then looked over at him and put his fingers to his lips, shushing him. Shh. He then lifted the wand above my brother's head and then quickly brought it down over him. The bubble instantly disappeared, and so did Tommy. Frantic, my dad charged towards Noisy, but just before he could get to him, the clown brought the bubble wand over himself and vanished as well. My dad screamed frantically, looking around for the 2 of them. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the crowd began to stand up and try to help my dad look for them. Then we heard a car start up in the driveway. Several of us sprinted to the front yard and saw the clown car pulling out and taking off down the street. My dad, along with several others, got into their cars and peeled out, chasing after him. Then the clown car turned the corner, and by the time we got there, it had vanished. Upon the realization that we had lost him, my dad immediately broke down in tears, screaming and pounding on the steering wheel. I had never seen him get like that before, and I knew that it was all my fault. The following weeks were some of the worst I had ever experienced. Constant contact with the police and interviews, where everyone was relentlessly asking me about why I was on the dark web and what I knew about my little brother's disappearance. I honestly feel like I was lucky that they didn't pin the entire thing on me and just close the case. I didn't stop going on the dark web though. In fact, I started using it more. I knew that if there was any way I was going to find my brother's kidnapper, it wasn't going to be using the old-fashioned police detective model. I had to track Noisy down once he decided to stalk again. So I created various fake identities on numerous dark markets and made postings after postings for birthday party clowns to come perform at my son's party. Then, finally after several weeks of doing this, I got a response. Only it wasn't from Noisy. It was from another old man dressed as a clown, who included a picture of himself in the posting with a response. The weirdest thing was though, the old man had a cleft lip and looked just like my little brother, only he had aged at least 50 years. I was really freaked out by this and had to know more, but after I posted several times for him to meet me, I think he could tell that I was trying to trick him because he would never show up. I'm gonna continue to look for him as long as I can, but I think he knows it's me, and for some reason, he doesn't want to be found. Halloween ain't scary. I've known that ever since I've been old enough to know what it was. I know it as I arrived to school in the old white sheet with 2 holes cut out. It's my costume, and it will do. As I close my locker, I'm greeted with a boo from some dumb kid wearing a scream mask. He must think he's pretty clever. I shrug at him and start in the other direction. I know it as my teacher lines us up for the annual 8th grade haunted house. I walk through, hounded by plastic skeletons and fake blood, a mechanical scream and crackling. It's exhausting. I don't even flinch. I know it as the teacher dismisses us for the day with a warning to be careful trick-or-treating tonight. Beware of pranksters and child snatchers and people who put razor blades in candy. Stay with your friends or a trusted adult. Come home at a reasonable hour. Don't make yourself vulnerable to strangers. I know it as the teacher is talking nonsense, that trick-or-treating isn't risky or dangerous. It's an excuse. It's an opportunity. I know it as I know that statistically speaking, you're far more likely to be harmed by a family member than a complete stranger. Same goes for kidnapping. I know it as I walk the streets that night, clutching my worm pillowcase, wrestling with rappers, and hope against hope that day, reality will defy the odds. That I'll be taken. That some lunatic in a white van will come up behind me, grab me, throw me in his trunk. I know it as I realize the front porch lights of all the houses are turned off. It's time to go home. For the first time today, I feel fear. I know it as I walk home as slowly as possible and think about next year. I'll be in high school. People will begin to look at me funny when they answer the door. They'll say I'm too old. It's okay. I'll just wear this ghost costume again so no one sees my face. And I'll do the same thing the year after that. I'll do it for as long as I have to. I know it as I scramble to suck down as many candies as possible while I can. Damn, no razor blades. I hear footsteps. Halloween ain't scary. It's a special time of year. The leaves have started to change color and blanket the ground below the now bare trees. The fronts of the supermarkets are lined with decorations, costumes, and candies. The spirit Halloween stores, timely specters that they are, reanimate and set up shop all across town. And every year, as the season begins to creep up on us like a routine plague, I think the same thing. God, I hate Halloween. There's always so much work to do, and somehow, despite the weeks of warning, it always seems to creep up on me. Take this year for instance, a week away, and I've only just settled on the perfect house. It's easy if you know where to look. This year, I settled on a 2-story at the end of the one-way street who lives out of town, put it up for market after their house flipping project ran out of money. Their asking price was too high, so it quietly sat on the market for a while. Sad for them, perfect for me. Of course, my work has only just begun. I need to get decorations for the front entry, supplies for the harvesting, a van for transportation, candy for trick-or-treaters, and a fake ID for any police officers who come by. It'll all be worth it in the end. See, when the light's on out front, the children come knocking. Some have parents, others travel with friends, and an unfortunate few walk the dark streets of Halloween night all alone. Halloween is the best holiday of the year. No, not because of sweets and costumes, though the outfits that some people come up with are really something, but because of the excitement. Everyone is anticipating the coming holidays, no one more so than yours truly. You see, I'm a pumpkin farmer. It's sort of a tradition at this point. Each generation has improved and upgraded the business, making it grow bigger and better every time. This year, it's my go. I spent the last 2 years on this plan now, and it's gonna make the biggest, best pumpkin patch you'll ever see. You see, my invention is a seed, but not just any seed. I made them so that all they need to grow is a little soil, and they'll be growing faster than a weed and manure. My pumpkins will be the best in town. No one will stand a chance. Currently, it's Halloween night, and I'm waiting to try out my babies. That is what they are at this point. I spent so long loving them and nurturing them. I wait in my house for the first visitor to arrive. I hear the doorbell and go to open the door. I'm met by a lone girl, about 16 or 17. She's dressed in a short cheerleader dress, covered in blood. Fake. I know real blood when I see it. And currently trying to discreetly hide the cigarette she has smoking. "Trick or treat," she says, looking completely bored out of her mind. I smile at her, but she doesn't react. Instead, holding out her hand, obviously gesturing for sweets. My smile doesn't falter as I give her a single chocolate piece, nor when she huffs in annoyance and struts down my garden path, stopping only to flick her half-lit cigarette into my flower bed and eat the piece of chocolate I gave her. It doesn't falter when she starts to choke and turns around in horror and confusion, showing the large, pumpkin-sized lump in her stomach, slowly growing larger and larger with each terrified breath she takes. When she collapses on the ground, the pumpkin having finally ruptured her stomach and torn through her skin, I smile wider. My baby's worked wonderfully. I turn to go back inside my house, but out of the corner of my eye, I see a young boy walking up the path, candy bag in tow, completely oblivious to the corpse just feet away from him, hidden under a sea of vines and an island of pumpkin, smiling just as happy as I am. It seems I had another walking bag of soil up for grabs. I hold up my chocolate, my babies, excitement building as I imagine how big this pumpkin patch will be. Halloween really is the best holiday of the year. Thomas hated Halloween. It's a combination of everything he disliked. Crowds, darkness, and fake monsters. Fake monsters were the worst though, because how do you even know if it's fake? There was one silver lining to the day he dreaded: candy. Tommy could never resist the sweet treats. Since his mother never passed them out or anything to the neighborhood children, going house to house was the only option. After finally finding the courage to go trick-or-treating, he started down the street. The pumpkin costume his mother had stuffed him into was a bit tight, but he waddled persistently. It didn't take long to fill the bottom of the plastic pumpkin with licorice and jawbreakers. Most of the houses just left the lights on without adding any extra decorations in their yard. Those were the places he felt more comfortable approaching, but they never seemed to be giving away anything good. With searching eyes, Tommy noticed the strobe light of a home not too far away. The place seemed to have a decent amount of money, according to their display. Tommy's shaky legs dragged him slowly towards the house. As he approached the yard, he could make out more than an impressive scene. At the front gate, barbed wire was weaved around the archway. At least 3 different types of strobe lights flashed brightly, giving everything an old movie effect. To the left of the large tree stood something that took the breath out of Tommy's mouth. The decorative creature stood at least 2 stories high. Its stretched, pale green flesh shone in the moonlight. The twiggish body ended with a rotting pumpkin head. Its face pointed downwards at its vine-like fingers. The appendages held a mannequin child about the same age as Tommy. The child's torso was ripped down the middle in a grotesque fashion. At the creature's feet laid full-size candy bars and fake blood. Fake monsters. Tommy heard a voice in his head remind him of the fact. Despite that, his heart was still thundering loudly in his pudgy chest. A neighborhood kid's laugh broke in the distance and snapped him from his frightened trance. Fake monsters, he told himself, and started walking towards the scattered treasure. Fake monsters, he kept reminding himself. The thing's legs not far away. Then Tommy suddenly remembered something. He turned around, back towards his home, and could barely see it in the distance. He looked back at his shoes, just as a thought broke. Why didn't he recognize these decorations? Before terror finally set in, a body fell in front of his feet. The corpse splattered blood across the orange outfit. A scream had barely left his mouth when the world was ripped out from under him. The vines wrapped around his body, then began to rip. Thomas's last comprehensible thought was that he heard talking in the distance. Let's check out that house. They gotta have good stuff. Unless you're scared. Then the fake monster tore open his body. Two days after Christmas, and no great stir was through the house. The done-to-death holiday tales were coming to an end, thankfully. I waited for the tales of killer snowman and invaders who aren't Santa Claus to fade away from the internet's craving eye. Everyone was at work or gone home, and it was just me and my computer, which is why I want to regale the web with yet another holiday tale. I have a neighbor, a strange old cross-eyed man who we'll call Mr. Halloween. He's harmless, I think. The neighborhood I live in, despite being a rough town, is very peaceful. Only once has a house been robbed here, and when the perpetrators were caught, they were found in the cells completely burned to death. Strange noises emanate from Mr. Halloween's house the night it happened. I don't know how he got that nickname, Mr. Halloween. Maybe it's because he's a spooky guy, but no one knows his real name. My parents don't talk about him. Kids stay away from his house. I often chance a hello in the mornings, and he'll just look at me with his emerald eyes and a grunt. That's okay though, because I'm neighborly, and someone interacts with the old man. Everyone wins. What's strange to me is that on Christmas night, every year there's a great commotion about his house. Generally I just ignore it, but this year I chanced to look through his curtains. All I saw through his window was him dressed in his Sunday best in the living room of his house, talking to someone. The next night, as I wake up at 3 a.m., someone tries to break in. I saw them try to pry the door, and then I saw a pentagram light up in Mr. Halloween's living room. There's a blood-curdling scream, and the would-be burglar went up in flames. I think Mr. Halloween knows that I saw what happened. I also think he knows that I'm quite grateful. I don't mind it and no one knows. What's wrong with your friendly neighborhood Satanist?